All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to call to order the public hearing for Tuesday, October 7th at 7 o'clock. My name is Mike Little, Mayor for the District of North Vancouver, and so the pleasure falls to me to welcome you all here to this public hearing. A public hearing is a quasi-judicial setting, and so I'm going to be reading a little bit of a script at the front end to sort of lay out the procedures for this evening's meeting. And so I'm going to go through that first. I have this as public hearing entirely, but.
It says on the screen, public hearing.
Your Worship, the public hearing and the public meeting will be run concurrently. The two items are so intertwined as to be really inseparable. So they'll be run at the same time. People can comment both on the business license bylaw or the zoning bylaw amendment.
It's in the script. There you go. Okay, so tonight we're going to be hearing the short-term rentals and bed and breakfast amendments to the zoning bylaw and the business license bylaw. As advertised, we're holding a public hearing for amendments to the zoning bylaw and public meeting for the amendments to the business license bylaw in relation to short-term rentals and bed and breakfast. As the two bylaws are closely related, we will hold the public hearing and public meeting concurrently. This means anyone who feels that their interest is affected by either bylaw will be afforded the opportunity to speak. The public hearing and public meeting are being convened pursuant to Section 464 of the Local Government Act and are being held in a hybrid meeting format, meaning there's a combination of in-person and electronic participation by some or all members of council, staff, and the public. And as you can see, we have two members of the council joining us virtually, which means the entire council is participating in this evening's meeting. The chair has established the following rules for this hearing and meeting. We will first go through the established list of speakers. At the end of the speakers list, the chair may call for any other speakers not on the speakers list. I should have said, we should probably update that to say, first we'll hear a presentation from staff, then we'll go to the speakers list. You will have 5 minutes to address council for a first time. Begin your remarks to council by stating your name. After everyone who wishes to speak has spoken once, speakers will then be allowed one additional 5-minute opportunity to speak. Any additional presentations will only be allowed at the discretion of the chair. Please do not repeat information from your previous presentations and ensure your comments remain focused on the bylaws under consideration this evening. If you have provided written submission, there's no need to read it as it will have already been seen by the council. You may summarize or briefly reiterate the highlights of your submission, but ensure your comments pertain to the bylaws under consideration at this hearing and meeting. All members of the audience are asked to be respectful of one another as diverse opinions are expressed. Council wishes to hear everyone's views in an open and impartial forum. Some important notes about public hearings and public meetings. Council is here to listen to the public, not to debate the merits of the bylaws. Council may ask clarifying questions. The clerk has a binder containing documents and submissions related to the bylaws, which council has received and which you are welcome to review. This is available at the table next to the door and online at dnv.org/agenda. Everyone at the hearing will be provided an opportunity to speak. If necessary, we will continue the hearing and meeting on a second night. At the conclusion of the public input, council may request further information from staff, which may or may not require an extension of the hearing and meeting. Or council may close the hearing and meeting, after which council should not receive further new information from the public. Finally, please note that this hearing and meeting are being held via Zoom and recorded in accordance with the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. And I will just say we had a public hearing on a sort of similar matter recently, and there were lots of questions. And so just to be clear, a public hearing isn't the best opportunity for a question and answer session. It's for us to hear your concerns generally. The best opportunities for question and answer are by email or calling the staff or talking to people ahead of the public hearing. Because if questions are asked and we may not have the staff on hand to answer those questions here necessarily tonight. Tonight is about hearing your input on the bylaws as they were presented. So at this point, I'm going to call on the clerk to introduce the bylaws up for discussion this evening. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. As noted, the public hearing is being held in respect of zoning, District of North Vancouver zoning bylaw amendment 8631, and the public meeting is being held in respect of business license bylaw amendment bylaw 8632. I will describe each bylaw. Bylaw 8631 proposes to amend the zoning bylaw by replacing the definition of bed and breakfast, adding definitions for principal residence and short-term rental, replacing Part 4, Section 405, home occupations, subsection H, regarding the number of home occupations permitted at the same premises, adding regulations for short-term rentals as follows: principal residence requirement, prohibition of short-term rentals in permitted caretaker dwelling units and non-market housing units, maximum of 6 guests, and requirement for 1 off-street parking stall. Also adding short-term rental businesses to the list of permitted accessory uses in Part 5 of the residential zone regulations. And finally, adding designated expressions and fines for ticketing violations of the short-term rental provisions of the zoning bylaw. And for your benefit, bylaw 8632 proposes to amend the business license bylaw by adding definitions for bed and breakfast operator, principal residence, short-term rental, and short-term rental operator. Also adding regulations for short-term rentals, requirement to be located in the principal residence of the owner or tenant with a limit of 6 guests. Adding regulations for short-term rentals and bed and breakfasts as follows: emergency contact information requirement, information on relevant district of North Vancouver bylaw requirements, must provide a valid business license number in advertising, listings, or promotional material. Licensed inspector must be provided with a written description of the proposed rental and detailed plans of proposed off-street parking prior to operating. Requirement to post fire safety plan by all entrances and exits, and have a smoke alarm and fire extinguisher on each floor, as well as a carbon monoxide detector on each floor that contains a gas appliance. Testing, inspection, and maintenance requirements for all life safety equipment. And finally, requirement to produce inspection, testing, maintenance records to the inspector upon request. Your worship, those are the 2 bylaws, and there is a presentation from Mr. Gilmore.
Yes, welcome, Mr. Gilmore. Are you going to do a presentation from up here or from over there? Thank you. So we're going to be starting off with a presentation from staff for up to 15 minutes, and then we will move directly to public input after that time. So welcome, Ryan Gilmore. Looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council and members of the public. My name is Ryan Gilmore. I'm a planner with the Community Planning Department. And I'm here this evening to give a brief presentation on proposed bylaws 8631 and 8632. Together, these bylaws propose a regulatory framework and enforcement approach for short-term rentals. Short-term rentals are not currently permitted in the district, but as I will discuss, they are common not only in the district, but throughout the region and around the world. Different communities have tried various approaches to regulating short-term rentals based on their specific contexts and challenges. The regulatory framework outlined in the draft bylaws proposes to regulate short-term rentals through business licenses, to limit the scope of this use by restricting short-term rentals to principal residences only, and to provide additional revenue from license fees to support an active management approach to enforcement, as opposed to the complaint-driven approach currently used. The framework as a whole is intended to help manage the neighborhood impacts associated with short-term rentals and help ensure housing in the district is available for long-term renters and residents. This presentation will take approximately 10 minutes. So short-term rentals have been operating in the district for many years, despite being prohibited. And as you can see from the map on the right, they operate all across the district in all neighborhoods. The number of listings has fluctuated over time, but as of last week, October 4th, the number of active listings was 1,018, which is an increase from May of this year, where the number was 832. And just to give this number some context, there are approximately 34,000 dwelling units in the district based on the 2021 census. So the number of listings represents about 3% of housing units. Of the short-term rentals, the majority of listings, or 84%, are located in single-family homes, and this could include suites, while only 15% of listings are located in multifamily units. Of the short-term rentals listings currently, 89% are for entire homes, rather than a room within a home while the owner is present.
Can you just say that last part again?
Yes. So of the short-term rental listings currently, 89% are for entire homes. So that would be the entire dwelling unit. And the remainder would be for just a room in a home. So it could be somebody who's staying at home, but renting a room down the hall. Last spring, we conducted public engagement to understand the community's thoughts on housing options for single-family neighborhoods, and through which we received feedback from residents on short-term rentals. The engagement demonstrated support for allowing short-term rentals in all housing types, including the main portion of single-family homes, suites and coach houses, townhouses, and apartments. Throughout the engagement, participants had the opportunity to provide the reason for the responses, and several key themes emerged. The two most common concerns we heard were related to the impact short-term rentals can have on long-term rental housing availability and the potential negative neighborhood impacts associated with short-term rentals. The most common benefit we heard was the importance of short-term rentals as a source of income to residents. The feedback described is summarized in the What We Heard report, which is included in the public meeting materials. At the July 24th council meeting, Bylaw 8631 was introduced to council to propose a regulatory framework for short-term rentals. And as noted earlier, short-term rentals are not currently permitted in the district. Bylaw 8631 proposes to allow short-term rentals in all zones where residential uses are permitted, including in single-family and multifamily zones, but would not permit short-term rentals in non-market housing and caretaker units. Short-term rentals would only be permitted in a principal residence, and both owners and renters with owner's permission, would be eligible to apply for a business license. These proposed changes reflect the public engagement and council input received to date. And just before proceeding, I want to take a moment just to review the concept of principal residence, as this can be one that's a little bit challenging to understand at times. And it's a very important feature of the framework that we're proposing. So short-term rentals would only be permitted in principal residences, which is where somebody lives most of the time, and a person can have only one principal residence. So I have two examples to share to help illustrate this concept. In the first, we have an owner of a single-family home. The owner lives in the main house. It is their principal residence. So this dwelling unit meets the principal residence requirement and would be eligible for a short-term rental business license.
Ryan, I'm just going to get you, just take your time with this. I think
Sure.
this is really important. Don't be under the gun for the 15 minutes. Just take your time on this part because I think it's really important.
Fair enough, thank you. So yes, I'll start again on this example. So the owner lives in the main portion of the home. It is their principal residence. It's where they live most of the time. This, based on that description, this unit meets the principal residence requirement, and it would be eligible to apply for a short-term rental business license. And this would allow the owner of that unit, the resident of that unit, to rent their home for short periods of time while they're away, or a room in their home while they're at home. In the same example, this house also has a secondary suite that is vacant. Because the suite is vacant and has no long-term tenant, the unit does not meet our definition of a principal residence, and therefore the owner could not use the secondary suite as a short-term rental. And to contrast that example, I'll share the second example where the suite is home to a long-term tenant. With the owner's permission, the long-term tenant would be eligible to apply for a short-term rental business license because the secondary suite is their principal residence. So the principal residence requirement is intended to limit the overall scope and impact of short-term rentals and to help ensure housing is available for long-term renters and residents. Through the review process following first reading of the bylaws, two items were identified requiring correction and clarification. First, an older definition of short-term rental was inadvertently included in the draft bylaw, which refers to short-term rentals being permitted in single-family buildings only, rather than the intended all residential zones. So as discussed in the council report from July 5th, and in the bylaw introduction, the recommendation is for short-term rentals to be allowed in all housing types, not just single-family dwellings. And additionally, staff proposed a minor language clarification in the draft bylaw to replace the word premises with dwelling unit. Now this changes to help avoid potential misinterpretation and better reflects the intent of the bylaw, which is again to allow short-term rentals in all housing types and when the dwelling unit is a principal residence. So an amended version of the bylaw will be, with these changes, will be presented to council prior to second reading. At the same meeting on July 24th, Bylaw 8632 was also introduced, which proposes amendments to the business license bylaw to support the implementation and enforcement of the regulatory framework. The changes to this bylaw mean that short-term rental operators will be required to obtain and display a valid business license on all advertising. Through the business license application process, applicants would be required to provide an emergency contact and safety equipment for all rental units, submit an owner consent form if the short-term rental is being used operated by a tenant, submit a strata consent form if the unit is in a multi-family strata building, and provide a parking plan detailing the proposed parking arrangement. And to summarize, the proposed bylaws outline a framework to regulate short-term rentals through business licenses, to limit the scope of this use by restricting short-term rentals to the principal residences only, and to generate additional revenue from license fees to support an active management approach to enforcement. Should the proposed changes be approved, staff will focus efforts in 2024 on educating residents and operators about the new regulations, and then leading into 2025, when all operators will be expected to be licensed and an active enforcement will be in effect at that time. And then lastly, the province is expected to introduce short-term rental legislation this fall. And while we don't know the details of this legislation at this time, we've been told that local governments with short-term rental bylaws, business license regimes, and proactive enforcement will be well positioned to leverage these tools when they're in place. And with that, I will conclude. And myself, Tina Atva, and Dan Milburn are here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a speakers list that was created ahead of time by people who contacted the clerk's office before the hearing. And so there are 8 speakers signed up to speak. Don't worry about it if you're not in that list. By the time when I get to the 8th speaker, I'm going to start asking for hands or virtual hands, and we're not going to stop the public hearing until everybody's had an opportunity to speak. So don't worry about that. We'll get to it. The first speaker I have is Aaron Jonkier, followed by Sid Mirashemi. And we can have the microphone on either.
Yeah.
Yeah. Way out. There you go. Welcome. You have 5 minutes to address the hearing.
Okay, thank you. I'm a bit of a loud talker, so if I talk too loud, just tell me to hush down a little bit.
Sounds great.
My name is Aaron Jonkier, and along with my wife and 2 children, I have lived in the district in North Vancouver for about 20 years. We bought in the early 2000s when we were both in our late 20s. And that purchase is the only reason that my wife and I currently have a house on the North Shore. With the cost of buying real estate nowadays, it would be impossible on our income for our family to own anything remotely close to what we do. We feel like we're a middle-class family living in an upper-class city and district. Full stop. I am supportive of putting in a policy to manage short-term rentals, but from what I understand about what was just presented, I don't support what's being proposed. I do support rentals with no license caps, so long as the principal resident requirement is met. And for me, the principal residence would include any short-term rental of a secondary suite or a coach house, so long as the owner is living on the property. I am against any sort of short-term rental where the owner lives off-site. These are wrong. And my support for allowing short-term rentals is based on my experience and my current situation I'm involved in. And before I get to that bigger picture, I'm also here to encourage the district and the province and the federal government, we're here as well, to make changes to permitting, zoning, and other bylaws that would allow for greater diversity, more support to build long-term accommodations, and greater incentives for homeowners to solve the situation. We started towards building a coach house in February of 2017. At that time, the City of Vancouver, City of North Vancouver, and District had begun allowing coach houses, and we went down the road. However, getting approval from the district for our coach house in the district proved to be an incredibly challenging experience. Due to challenges with permitting, engineers, arborists, neighbors, bylaws, work required on district land, changing bylaws, neighbor approval requirements, changing targets for permits, a changing coach house application permits, limits on what we could build, COVID changes at the district, and ultimately 2 giant trees that were on district land. We didn't start building our coach house until fall of 2020. That's 40 months. 40 months. With a 12-month build, it took us 52 months to build a coach house. We began the process to build a coach house with our family in mind. I have an ailing father-in-law who has dementia, and our plan was to put him in our coach house. But given the time it took us to finally build our coach house, the time for him to move to a new residence had come and gone. It had been too much of a challenge for him to move to a new residence. It was best to keep him in his house where his reduced facilities could be minimized, make him more comfortable as he quickly moves towards the end of his time. In addition to the time it took, a coach house also cost us $400,000 to build a 550 square foot coach house. $400,000. Given the cost of building on the North Shore, along with the district improvements, meeting step code requirements, paying district fees, in addition to sky-high costs of building, labor, materials, wood, tradespeople, everything, it cost us $750 a foot to build a coach house on our property. I'm running out of time, so I'll try and make it quicker here. We took these costs in stride, and we still hope to put my mother-in-law in our coach house one day. But she's not ready yet, and as anyone with elderly parents knows, you can't move someone in when they don't want to. So with recent hikes in mortgage rates and mortgage we just renewed 12 months ago, along with my wife taking time away from her job to care for her father, without the income from our short-term rental, we would not be anywhere financially solvent. Allowing us to rent our coach house short-term, not allowing, I guess we've been renting it illegally, has provided us with the necessary funds to survive as a family of 4, pay for all that life entails on the North Shore, allowing my wife to care for her father and giving us the flexibility to move our mother into the coach house when her health reaches a point of needing support. While we're going deeper into our line of credit each month, it's not as bad as if we rented long-term. Yes, the challenges of housing are real and need to be dealt with. I work at a business that employs many young people, and the needs of renters are real and true, full stop. However, taking away short-term rentals from homeowners that are trying to pay for their principal residence through these short-term rentals on their property in a tough economy is not the answer. Streamlining approval of multifamily dwellings on single lots, changes to zoning to allow the ability to build more density in residential neighborhoods, and supporting homeowners with measures, bylaws, programs, and approvals, reduced barriers and incentives is the answer.
I like the more and better. I like the chime.
Thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you. No, sorry, folks. Just, we want to make sure that this is a place where people feel welcome to come and share their views. We find applause and cheering and other things to be a bit intimidating for some people, and so it's actually not permitted in the hearing. And so if you could please not applaud or cheer or anything. Thank you very much. The next speaker I have is Sid Mirashemi, followed by Mike Blomkamp. Yeah.
No, is it okay if I ask my question? I would like to listen to more people.
Okay, but there's going to be no questions, to be clear, Sid. The public hearing is to hear your concerns.
Do you want me to talk now, or can I wait a couple of more people?
You can, yeah, no, I could strike and you can show up at the, when I'm done the list, they'll come back to you, no problem.
I'd like to listen to 2 more people. Is that okay?
Well, I'm going to put you to the bottom of the 8, but then you'll be up, okay?
No, I'll just.
There you go. Either way, I just don't want to.
Good try.
Well, thank you so much to all of you, and happy belated Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
To most of you, and also to the audience. I pretty much was agreed with the first speaker, Aaron. Was that your name? Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What he's saying is the voice of many people. So I don't want to repeat what he said, right? That's why I ask for a permission if I speak, So if my concern, are repetition, so I don't have to say it. So I agree with the just about all of the things that he said, but the one thing that is on the first, I just want to know the reason behind it on the first graph that they show. If the bottom one is empty, the owner cannot rent it. What was the reasons behind that? Because some of us, we have about, as Aaron mentioned, 400 or 500 square feet. We've been paying taxes all along. It's a registered suite. Quite frankly, it's like a motel that the rent is $250. If you come and rent it for $100, the owner would rather keep the place empty because it costs somebody to come clean it, services and all that thing. So just having something really is not create, I think Aaron put it in, in really right words. So what I would like to say, first of all, what are the allowance if you want to expand this? And is there any relation if you have a big lots, can add extra, rental suites? So this, I wanted to be clear. So pretty much the idea is great. I appreciate that all of you are doing. However, let's keep in mind that when you are, I'm all for it, but we are also got to look, when you give more, then you're going to have more people. So in my situation, I live on Kaplan Road. So you will make the road more crowded. And also you have the pedestrian going to be more, that they have to stay in the bus stop to get their shelters. Of course, this is not related to today, but it's pretty much related to what I talked, last time that I was here. So first of all, we have to make sure the road is good, not Capilano Road. There are other places in the district. I'm sure you are aware of it. So we got to take care of that problems and the bus shelters. And it doesn't matter who built the bus shelters. We want them to be there. I appreciate for Mr. Patterson. I've worked with his company. He's a great man. We don't care who's going to do the job. We want just this to be done. Shelters, buses, and Capilano Road speed, excessive speed. The rest of it, I'm okay with it. And let us have, if some lot, like they are paying $10,000 taxes with, let's facilitate to have, I don't know all the bylaws, facilitate to have maybe one extra. If you get the member of your family to live. So I want my daughter and son, to come and live with us, but I have to build something, for them to come and live. So I want this to be allowed. If you don't want to rent it, at least to a member of family, you would be able to do it, or to a nanny or something. I need a place when myself and my wife, we need somebody to come and take care of us. I can't get, my son and daughter take away from their, lifestyle to come and look after us. I have to hire a nanny, so I need an extra suite for the nanny. I'm sure this is going to be concern of many of citizens, but my time is, almost up. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Need to have people
Great.
confirm when they're talking about rentals.
Yeah.
To make it clear, they're talking about short-term rentals or long-term rentals. Otherwise, I get confused.
Okay, I think on the first two speakers, I think they were both not satisfied that it's not going to, that a secondary suite unit would not be available for short-term, but it would be available for long-term rental. And I think the sentiment was they think it should also be available for short-term. But okay, the next speaker that I have is Mike Blomkamp, followed by Joe Tibble. And I believe Mike Blomkamp is joining us virtually. So can we just check and see if Mike Blomkamp is connected to the meeting?
Hi there.
Hi, welcome. You have, we can hear you clearly. You have 5 minutes to address the hearing.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Little and councillors. Thanks for your time today. And thank you, Aaron, for sharing those words. I'm sorry about your father. It's never nice to hear. So yeah, Mike Blomkamp, I'm resident of DNV. I have a young family. I have very similar concerns to the few that have been mentioned earlier today. And I also wanted to be clear that in general, I actually am in favor of putting together a short-term rental framework. The policy, the bylaw 8632, I don't have any problems with that at all. Really, the biggest fundamental problem I have is the principal residence requirement that's kind of been put in there. So I got a little bit to go through, so I'll just kind of mention a few things. I really don't think it's the responsibility, the burden of a homeowner, single family homeowner or apartment homeowner to be able to provide their property as the rental housing, as the long-term rental housing stock. This should be the responsibility of the feds, the province, the local municipalities to provide the long-term rental stock, and they can do that through buying, building, and operating their own rental pool and not on the backs of the homeowners, limiting the use of their own property. So I want to also be clear, I'm speaking to homes that contain a secondary suite, something you just mentioned, Mayor Little. In my case, I have a single family home and I have a secondary suite in our basement. In our case, that should absolutely be allowed to be rented through a short-term rental license under bylaws. They're being proposed, the changes in the fees. But I'm also not in favor, and I don't think that speculators necessarily be able to buy a condo and do short-term rentals. The next aspect is that the basements like ours in the main portion, there's things within Airbnb and those kind of short-term rentals where as long as the owner is at home and they manage the short-term rental on site, it can avoid the typical complaints regarding noise, parking, and all those kind of concerns that come with short-term rentals that Ryan mentioned in his report. So, I have no problem with the framework, safety measures, parking plans, bylaw license fees, they're all good measures. I also think that the 3% that's being collected on short-term rentals can be guided towards affordable housing initiatives in the district as opposed to going to North Shore Tourism Association. So I think that would be a bonus. And I really think that the problem stemmed from the way that this was presented to the public, going back to the council in 2017. I went and did a deep dive, and I actually didn't hear about this until just the other day when it came up in my neighborhood. And then I did a deep dive to kind of find out what was going on. And I found that the way that it was provided and presented was very misleading, and the real definition of a principal residence has kind of been skewed. And the way it was presented when I went back and read the reports, the public engagements, and what we heard is that there was never a time at which the question came out from the outset to say, would you be comfortable with your principal residence being including the basement suite being used for short-term rentals? It was only ever set up to say in very small print that your secondary suite didn't count towards your principal residence. So I feel like when it was asked, the perception was, of course I want it for all different housing types. Why wouldn't I? That sounds great. Oh, I don't want a cap. That sounds no problem. It's my principal residence. Until you got into the nitty-gritty of the detail, when it got quite confusing that my basement suite, my secondary suite, which again is something you pay taxes on, is not actually part of my principal residence. It's a new definition that you guys want to change in the bylaw that isn't the case in the CRA. It will probably change with the legislation that's coming, but I wanted to say that I feel like the public engagement should be better explained and more engagement. I think there's only about 500 different counts over almost 6 years of this planning of engagement from the public, which I feel is quite small actually, and seems like it kind of went under the radar. It's got a little bit of time left here. And it's not just an income thing that Aaron alluded to and others have alluded to. I think there's a lot of flexibility that comes with the biggest points for us. For me and my family, we've used our secondary suite when we had a renovation from a leak that happened in our house. We were able to go downstairs and live in our house while they repaired upstairs. We have 2 young kids at home. We've traveled quite a bit. And when we do, we often use Airbnbs. It's a nice benefit for us to go. And we feel the same way. We have tenants that come here and stay. They're obviously from outside visiting and they don't want to stay in a hotel. We also have friends who needed a place to stay for short periods of time. And when they do renovations or repairs, temporary housing, breakups, whatever it may be, we have a place that they're able to stay. We don't have a long-term tenant we can't kick out. I have family members who come and stay with us for multiple times because they come and look after the kids with us. They live outside of the country. And I would not have that flexibility if I had to have a long-term tenant in place. We also know that there's insurance claims that kick people out and they're forced to be in a hotel. It seems unfair in that sense. And lastly, we allow pets in our place, which is also a thing for tourists, people in those similar situations. They're not allowed to go anywhere in a lot of hotels. So the thought of punishing all the different examples by mandating short-term rentals that are banned in any that I mentioned seems unfair essentially to the homeowners. I had more to say on there, but I guess my time's up. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Mike Blomkamp. Next speaker I have is Joe Tibble, also joining us virtually. Joe Tibble, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you good. Can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly. Welcome. You have 5 minutes to address the hearing.
Great, thanks. And thanks for all the previous speakers. I kind of echo what they had said previously. You know, my name is Joe. My family and I live in the district of North Van. You know, and we're in favor of short-term rentals under, I guess, the proposed framework. You know, I was born and raised in the North Shore, spent better part of the last 30 years living here. Me and my family are active members in the community. I coach kids baseball, Avalanche girls hockey. I volunteer for local community events like Canada Day in Pemberton Heights. I also volunteer at my kids' elementary school. I love where I live. I love the North Shore. But in my opinion, kind of making restrictive rules on short-term rentals could have a negative impact on the community. You know, if it's not families like mine, or Aaron's that we heard from earlier, or Mike's, you know, who's going to be buying in our neighborhoods? That's a big concern for me. You know, we were recent buyers in the North Shore in the last couple of years. And when you look at the average income, what it takes to own a home on the North Shore, it's virtually almost impossible with having, you know, rental income to help pay the mortgage and overhead costs. As Aaron alluded to earlier, you know, we're in the same boat. You know, young families are the buyers of the homes in the North Shore now, like mine was 2 years ago. And most of them depend on this rental income. But that being said, we should also have the flexibility to rent either as a long-term rental or short-term rental. You know, I appreciate many residents, you know, on the North Shore that have lived here for over 20 years, including my parents, who are both teachers here in the North Shore. They bought a house back in 1976 for $60,000, and they never had to worry about additional income to help pay the mortgage costs. But unfortunately, that situation just doesn't exist anymore, as most of us do need that extra income to help pay these mortgage costs, especially with the rising interest rates that we're seeing today. You know, I don't think banning short-term rentals is the solution. What I do agree is passing these bylaw amendments and allowing council and district to regulate what wasn't regulated before. You know, as people have mentioned before, that includes a parking plan, capping the number of guests, and as Mike said earlier, collecting that 3% municipality and regional tax that can be used for housing initiatives. And again, not putting that housing burden on the shoulders of homeowners. You know, we have a secondary suite currently and appreciate the flexibility that short-term rentals allow us. We've got family in Brazil, New Zealand that visit annually that stay in that suite when they come visit. You know, my wife left Brazil 10 years ago to start a family here. So it's a priority for us to have that family stay with us when they come to visit Vancouver. And having those beds in the long-term rental pool wouldn't allow us to do that. You know, allowing short-term rentals would allow us to rent out and help pay the increased costs, as I mentioned before, but also having, you know, the flexibility of having our family stay with us that don't live here. You know, if this bylaw doesn't pass, unfortunately, not only has the district lost a short-term rental unit from us, but we wouldn't put it in the long-term rental pool. I just find that the long-term rentals are just way too restrictive, and we just aren't willing to take that risk. You know, for neighbors that worry about noise and parking, like, I do hear you, I understand you, but how does a long-term rental solve that? I'd argue it could be actually potentially worse. You know, what happens if you rent to a long-term tenant that turns out to be loud and noisy and disrupts the neighborhood? You know, it's almost impossible to evict them. At least with short-term rentals, you have that flexibility. You know, I have 2 small kids, so safety is the utmost important. And I'd assume most landlords feel the same. And we do our best to make sure that Airbnb guests are well behaved and follow rules and are good members when they visit our community. You know, allowing short-term rentals under this proposed framework to begin with, you know, regulate them, enforce them. I guess what you were saying before, be in line with the federal and provincial governments, but also giving the homeowners the flexibility of choosing to rent it either in the short-term market or the long-term market. I think that's the crux of the issue. You know, it's really important. That's all I have to say. Thanks to the council, the mayor, and everyone in attendance for hearing me.
Thank you very much for your comments, Joe Tibble. The next speaker I have is Thompson Brennan, followed by Corey Cost. Thompson Brennan is joining us here in person.
Honorable Mayor, Council, neighborhood residents, thank you for allowing me the time to speak. My family's lived on the North Shore for over 25 years. I've been here for 20. We live in the Queensdale neighborhood. I am a former Public Art Advisory Committee member, also an advisory design panel member. So community really matters to me. This issue is difficult because it is so widespread in its impact in our neighborhood. We currently have a house in our neighborhood, very close to where we live, which has 4 separate Airbnb units in it. 2 in the house, a full basement suite with 2 bedrooms in each in the basement suite. Plus, they built a laneway house, not under permit, all of which are currently rented. This summer was hell on earth for us, and it turns out for all our immediate neighbors, which I didn't really realize until we started talking on the street throughout the summer. But my wife walked out and across the street directly in front of our house at the end of our driveway on our property as well, on the corner adjacent to our property, 100 cigarette butts at the height of the fire season. It drove her crazy, and it drove the rest of our neighbors to distraction with, yes, the parking and the coming and going at all hours of the night. It changes the nature of a neighborhood to have a short-term rental unit of that size next to anyone. Now, I understand that, you're very carefully considering allowing a single unit in an occupied household, which sounds good on paper, but I'm not sure how all of that's going to get enforced when if there's 1,000 units right now in the district available for short-term rental, and they're not regulated, they're not legal, and yet if you're proposing a single unit in a household, how can you possibly hope to regulate this? I went online and I looked at what's available around the world in terms of laws. And in Dallas, Barcelona, San Francisco, Seattle, London, Paris, Honolulu, Singapore, Denmark, Copenhagen, they're all struggling with this issue. And every place it's been legalized, in Quebec, for example, we all remember the conflagration and death that happened last year. 6 of those people who were dead were in unregistered Airbnb units. In Quebec, 80% of their 30,000 Airbnb units are not registered. They have tried hard, just like every other municipality, to contain this. But my question to you, and I know it's rhetorical at this point because I don't ask you to answer it, is how do we regulate this? How do we actually protect our neighborhoods? Because in ours, it has been grossly affected in a negative way. And I'm sorry for anybody who hopes to have income from this, but it's a tricky issue. I am fully in favor of long-term rentals. The market, if you believe the Economic Policy Institute, which has done an extensive study of this, the tourist dollars brought in by short-term rentals are outweighed by the loss in long-term rental market and the hotel tax revenues established by the Economic Policy Institute. If we hope to keep the character of our neighborhoods, and if we hope to keep the quality of as the district has laid out in its policy, learning, listening, and commitment to community, how do we do that with short-term rentals? I would rather see long-term rentals really expanded and tax benefits given to those who choose to do a long-term rental, because that's the only way I see helping housing. Every place short-term rentals in the world have been established, and whether they're regulated or not regulated, but especially if they're unregulated, long-term rental housing has gone down. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments, Thompson Brennan. Next speaker I have is Corey Cost, followed by Maureen James. And Corey Cost, I believe, is joining us virtually.
Good evening, Your Worship. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can clearly. Welcome, Corey. You have 5 minutes to address the hearing.
Okay. Well, I've been living in this residence since 1974, as you probably all know. Certainly, it wasn't quite as easy as one of the gentlemen had, even though we had a mortgage of $71,000. It was really tough going in the first few years, especially with the rise in interest rates hitting up to about 15% range. I sort of agree with the owner that the owner should live on site when having the short-term rental take place. I think it's the only way to have accountability, and should be no different than long-term rentals where you somehow are able to easily get hold of the person that's really in charge of his unit. I don't like short-term rentals, bottom line, but what you've chosen is probably not too bad for regulations. My main concern, of course, is enforcement of the bylaws, and bylaws notoriously don't get enforced. So I wouldn't rely on that as a citizen to solve any of the problems that result. I don't know what changes would trigger another public hearing later on. What it really counts as a land use, change in use, and how far do you have to make a change in your bylaws before you trigger another hearing? I really would like to know, and I think council should know what they are. Now, as for the presentation, let me share screen. I don't know if you can see this, Your Worship. I hope
Yes, clearly.
Okay. Well, there's a lot to read, but I won't read it out for you. These are in yellow. I think you can see the highlights. Contrary to the rhetoric of having home sharing, almost 50% of all Airbnb revenue last year was generated by commercial operators who managed multiple listings. And the homes were rented frequently enough last year that they are unlikely to house permanent residents anytime. And between these cities, 10 to 70% of them, the residents live in the neighborhoods whose rental vacancy rate is exceeded by the proportion of housing units that are frequently rented. So you can sort of see that having this in addition is really going to squeeze the rental vacancy rate. Be careful what problems you are solving and what problems you are creating, in other words. There's a very long series of studies, and I picked out one of the best ones in the Los Angeles area for people to review. I noticed that limiting the number of days per year that can be rented and meeting target affordability is the criteria for allowing such things. And the number of permits issued per square kilometer or neighborhood are all part of that parcel in California. But currently the district proposes bylaw appears to have none of these. You've thrown them all out. And they're sort of safety checks, or, on the next slide, here are the rules in British Columbia for Airbnb. You need to obtain a permit or license to run that in British Columbia. These are British Columbia rules, not municipal rules. Airbnb collects, remits about 8% GST on behalf of the host. There's additional sales and special tourism taxes included, which have already been mentioned. And many municipalities collect a local tax, 3%. And I believe, I may have not seen it or seen it, that the district is also proposing to do that. There are long-term impacts about losing your status as a residence complex if you rent too much of your home, more than 60 or less than 60 days, not 30 days, less than 60 days. And that can have consequences on trying to sell your place later down the line. So I'll leave it at this on my first go around.
Okay.
We've only covered 3 slides out of 10, so it'll take a while to go through the rest. Thank you.
I will put you at the top of the list for second time speakers. Thank you, Corey Cost, for your comments. The next speaker I have is Maureen James, followed by Gemma McDonald. Maureen James is joining us here in council chambers.
Thank you.
Welcome. You have 5 minutes to address the hearing.
Thanks very much. Good evening. I'm speaking to you today from the perspective of a homeowner in a residential neighborhood. I currently reside directly across the street from 2 properties operating short-term rentals in 2 basement suites located in their homes. Like the previous speaker, I've experienced a lot of negative impact on our neighborhood, and I apologize if some of this is repetitive to things you have heard from other members of the public other than this evening. Firstly, the parking is always an issue. We always have extra vehicles because it's a 2-bedroom suite. We often have 2 vehicles per house, so that's an extra 4 vehicles on the street. Between those 2 houses, the owners have 5 vehicles and a large residential trailer parked on the property. There's no additional on-site parking. There's no, one unit does have an additional on-site parking, but no one uses it. They all just park on the street. As a result, it's difficult to get out of my driveway. It's dangerous for kids trying to get to school, etc. Each homeowner also runs businesses out of the house, and so there's clients and employees coming and going. When you combine that with a short-term rental, you have cars everywhere. Sometimes my street looks like a war zone. I have barbecue smoke coming in my house through the summer. If I would like to open a window on the front side of my house, I have barbecue smoke. I have people standing at the top of my driveway, smoking cigarettes, leaving butts on the street. I have people vaping. I have people standing on my lawn or my driveway for cell phone use because the cell phone service in my neighborhood is somewhat spotty, and apparently my lawn is the best place to stand. I've had to ask children of the Airbnb people to stay out of my flower beds because everyone's on vacation and there's no parental supervision going on. So my feeling on this is that the homeowners do not see or experience these things. The homeowners running the short-term rentals do not see or experience these things. They're often living out the back of their properties. They're on their back deck, and the short-term rentals are out on the front patio in front of my house. They're not seeing it. They're not experiencing it. They are not living with strangers constantly standing, looking at their house, looking into their house. They only see money in their bank accounts, and that's offensive to me, as this is my neighborhood. This is what I bought when I bought this house. I've lived in the district for 26 years. I hazard a guess that neighborhood watch no longer applies in my neighborhood. I don't know who is a stranger that I should be reporting. There's just too many of them around. And I'm very concerned that I did not purchase my home to raise my family to live in a hotel zone. This is my residential neighborhood, and I like it to remain as such. If you have a longer term rental, at least that tenant becomes invested in living in the neighborhood, potentially living in the neighborhood and wanting to stay there on a longer term. We've had tenants in basement suites for 10 years. As a woman in my neighborhood with a daughter still living at home because she is not able to afford rent on her own yet, it's very disconcerting to have a lot of strange men standing on the top of your driveway making cell phone calls. It makes us uncomfortable to walk out the front door some days. I applaud some of the changes to this, but I don't believe this will help with keeping our neighborhoods a stable place to raise families. People choose to use the short-term rental because it's more lucrative than a long-term rental. These situations will help only the owner of the short-term rental. And the people living across the street from me, the properties living across the street from me, aren't abiding by the bylaws as they stand. And I'm sure they're not going to abide by your new amended bylaws if they come into force. It's just a very difficult thing to keep track of. This is one of the It's been a big issue for me, as I said, simply because I look out every day from my kitchen window at 2 properties running this, and I don't want to see this expand all the way down my street, and I don't want to see it expand into the entire district. So thank you for allowing me to speak this evening.
Thank you for your comments, Maureen. James. The next speaker I have is Gemma McDonald.
And if anybody has written comments that they'd like
Sure.
to leave for council, put them in a black tray on the desk.
Yeah, just so just to be clear about that is if you can email your comments ahead of time, or you can send them in till the close tonight, or send them into staff in either case. Plus also the black tray, if you have notes that you want to leave, they'll be circulated to council. If you leave them in the tray there, we'll make sure they get copied, scanned, and sent around to the council. Welcome, Gemma McDonald. You have 5 minutes to address the hearing.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Little, council, and members of the public. My name is Gemma, and I'm here representing Mount Seymour Resorts. Mount Seymour is a local family-owned and operated business, which is well established in the North Shore community, providing recreation, employment, business, and partnership opportunities in the area for nearly 4 decades. I'm the Programs and Guest Experience Manager at Mount Seymour, and I'm responsible for overseeing 3 departments, which between them need to hire up to 300 seasonal employees every year. I've been part of the Mount Seymour family for 8.5 years. Mount Seymour has always been a strong community partner, and we wish to see our community continue to flourish and succeed. We are here today to express our extreme concern regarding the lack of affordable rental housing on the North Shore. We define affordable as no more than 30% of gross income on rent. The short-term rental market has pushed long-term rental prices up as landlords appear to be influenced by rates charged on various short-term market platforms. The short-term rental market has also significantly reduced the inventory of long-term rental units, further limiting accessible and affordable housing. Mount Seymour supports the district's motion to update and enforce short-term housing policy for the benefit of restoring inventory for mid to long-term rental units, which in turn we hope will moderate prices. But we do have some concerns because if 1,018 short-term rental units become affordable long-term rental units, then great. But from what we've heard tonight from some of the property owners, that might not actually end up being the case. We put substantial efforts into attracting and retaining employees by offering a range of benefits that improve year by year. We have also found intelligent ways to help the housing issues ourselves by renting properties in the area and using an on-site cabin we have for accommodation. Additionally, we offer to find and vet tenants for local landlords who saving them the time and effort to do it themselves. And we provide complementary products to those who offer rents at affordable rates for our employees. Despite our efforts, the housing issue worsens every year and has been particularly dire in the past 3 years. I myself, I am a renter and I have a personal experience of this. I commute 1 hour either way to work every day because I can't afford to rent on the North Shore. I would love a 2 or 3 bedroom property, but that's just not the case, even as a senior manager at Mount Seymour Resorts. It's blatantly evident that we cannot compete with the acceleration of housing costs, regardless of how fulfilling our work culture is or how enticing our incentives are. This was especially true last season, as we saw nearly 20 full-time employees in key positions leave their employment at Mount Seymour mid-season due to the unaffordable cost of housing. They determined that living and working on the North Shore was not viable and returned to other parts of Canada or their home country. Recently, Mount Seymour has also struggled to recruit and retain year-round trade staff who, even at competitive trade wages, cannot find sustainable housing options. Each year, we hire approximately 600 seasonal employees who work for us in a variety of essential roles. And this year, the interest from the overseas candidates on working holiday visas returned to strong pre-COVID numbers. And we are pleased to see a significant number of employment offers have already been accepted. We are also proud that we offer a significantly higher than minimum wage for our frontline service positions. However, we must prepare for the reality that a proportion of our hires will likely withdraw their offer of employment because they won't be able to find affordable housing. Currently, we have 100 employees looking for affordable housing. This issue will exaggerate year by year if there's no intervention, which will predictably lead to certain areas of our business becoming unviable. This would negatively impact our local community, where many people choose to live for its easy access and enjoyment of mountain recreation. We have 5,000 people who live in North Vancouver who have purchased a season pass for this year, and they use that pass to visit multiple times. Skiing and snowboarding is part of the North Shore lifestyle. Our seasonal employees are vital to the health, success, and future of our business and the greater community, as many of our employees continue to work in other frontline tourism, hospitality, and service positions on the North Shore after completing a cycle of a season with us. This cycle of seasonal work supports a strong economy and vibrant community as residents remain in work and stay in accommodation on the North Shore. However, to achieve this level of functioning in a society where income from tourism is a leading contributor, the affordable rental market needs urgent attention in North Vancouver to support employed members of our community at all income levels. Affordable is defined as paying no more than 30% of gross income on rent. We support the proposed changes to the short-term rental policy by supporting the district's motion to update the short-term rental regulatory framework and enforcement approach. We hope to see the availability of affordable rental houses increase, but we emphasize that the availability of affordable rental units needs to increase in our community, not to be confused with the inventory of rental units. Affordable housing is essential to support North Vancouver's economy and a healthy functioning society. It should not be viewed as a privilege available to community members who have the financial means to reside here. The North Shore has always been a vibrant, diverse, supportive, and healthy place to live, work, and play, and we must ensure that it remains this way for generations to come. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Okay. Now I'm going to go to the room. Would anybody else like to speak to the public hearing? I see a hand over here, followed by a hand over here, and I see 2 virtual attendees, 4 virtual attendees that I'll get to after that. So if you would be willing to come down to the desk. Yeah. And if you could start your comments with your name, that would be appreciated.
Good evening. Good evening. This is Yasmin. Thank you for having us today and allowing us the opportunity to go over such matter. I've never attended such formal meetings, so and I wrote some of the notes, so excuse this. So I've been a new immigrant and I landed in District of North Vancouver, and I stayed here for about 20 years. And now I'm a mom of 2 kids who were born here, so I have a lot to say. So I am totally in favor of having short-term rental, and I'm in favor of having it in the secondary unit in the house when it's available. And I have my reasons, and I'll go over them. Short-term rental is seasonal due to the Vancouver weather. So we really should not worry about reducing number of houses available for long-term renters, as many still prefer to have long-term renters and have less hassle for cleaning and constantly accommodating guests. In fact, October, November, February, and March are 4 very quiet months that will balance out the income of the high season. So many young families prefer to wear a hat of cleaner, rental manager, 24/7 Airbnb secretary, yet stay at home and raise their kids, give them warm food after school, and take them out for an afternoon play date with neighborhoods. Let's not forget that having short-term rental in the same manner as hybrid work promoted post-COVID allow increased quality of neighborhood. Hear it from a mom. I'm studying a master in health, working in clinical design of New St. Paul Hospital with 2 toddlers at home. If I had the luxury of making some more money at home, I would definitely do so, and gladly will take care of my kids rather than paying $3,000 to a nanny per month. I'm working and studying full-time for extra $2,000 per month. That will probably be the income taxes at the end of each year. Short-term rental will bring many tourists to our neighborhood rather than high-density hotel zones such as downtown. The tourists will get to use and appreciate on items that we paid so much taxes to build and maintain, such as Caplana Suspension, Grass Grind, Deep Cove area, many local businesses that are continuously changing due to the lack of clients on Marine Drive, and others such as Mount Seymour. Another point that I figured out is that what we're advocating here with the new policy that our friend just advocated for, and that family can have their suites only for short-term rental if they live in a principal residence and not have the secondary suite available unless that renter is prepared to do so. However, such limitation on secondary suite, you are discouraging people to register their suite as a legal unit. As per your bylaw, legal units are not allowed for short-term rental. And if they're not registered as legal unit, then they have a capacity to be part of it, right? So you're living in the same home and you're renting the same place out. So that will be less taxes and less people, wanting to have the legal suite registered, perhaps. So we have 2 kids at home. Frankly, short-term rental with noises we make is more likely feasible than having a long-term rental. Having a short-term rental allowed in district will help our neighborhood, especially the majority living in the district of North Van, such as parents of young kids, those who work in remote positions, especially since post-COVID jobs become more available and abundant for hybrid and in-home positions, young families who are constantly studying and working. That will take off a lot of burden from our shoulder and will bring us back to the family neighborhood and our neighborhood. Our neighbor here advocating for long-term rent, and I agree with you that we have issue for long-term rental. However, the issue is so vast that won't be fixed with the number of secondary units available by changing bylaw and allowing and advocating for higher FSR for rental multifamily housing would be perhaps a better solution. Let's put that into perspective. Smallest multifamily unit have minimum 60 units available. And how many houses should be combined in our neighborhood that we have a secondary unit and are willing to rent them to the stranger rather than a family member, and so on and so forth, so that we combine those to make such number available. So literally allowing about 15 of such, high FSR building permits are equivalent to 1,500 short-term rental that District of North Vancouver will offer. So that's about it. Thank you very much for your time, everybody.
Just before we carry on with the speaker, a bit of a dilemma about what to clarify and not clarify. So within a public hearing, there are restrictions on how much I'm supposed to interfere and guide the discussion or anything like that. So, but what I've heard a number of times, I just want to be clear about, we're only considering these 2 bylaws in the way that it was described at the front of the meeting. And so when people are saying that they want their secondary suites to be available for short-term renters, even though they're not principal residences, that's not being considered at tonight's meeting. It's feedback received, we hear it, but it's actually not going to be what the council is going to be voting on when the matter returns to 2nd and 3rd reading. Neither for nor against what's currently presented will produce secondary suites being short-term rental available in the house, with one exception, and that is that if it passes and there's a renter that is a long-term renter, they would have the ability, with the permission of the owner of the property, to rent out that secondary suite, but not to the point that they become no longer the principal resident for the property. And so I just want to be clear that neither of the options on the table tonight, for or against what's presented, will produce what a number of people have asked for here today. The other piece that was mentioned in a few presentations that I also wanted to say, the same thing applies. That is asking for more flexibility for buildable FSR and construction space. That's also not being considered at the public hearing tonight. That can be part of a broader discussion. All of these regulations are living documents, and the council can consider those other matters as we evolve our plans for secondary suites and for short-term rentals going forward. I just want to be clear, they're not being considered in the bylaws up for discussion tonight. And when we get to 2nd and 3rd reading, those aspects will not be actually voted on by the council. I hope I've added clarity on that. I just want to be clear because a number of people kept saying similar types of comments about renting out secondary suites, short-term rental, and neither for nor against will produce that in tonight's discussion. The next speaker that I have is over here, Eric Jensen, and then I've got 3 virtual speakers, one marked as B, then Catherine, then Lyle will be coming up, and then we'll come back to the room. We'll swap back and forth. How about that? So welcome. Your name for the record, please.
Eric Jensen. Hello to everybody again, for many of you. So I think to just address what you just said, Mayor Little, I believe a lot of people are saying then that they do not want you guys to vote in favor of the bylaw as written, because a lot of people want to have that flexibility for their secondary suite is what, if I'm translating for my fellow constituents, that would be my understanding. And really the only thing that I'm surprised I haven't heard, but I think one of the primary issues that we have as a community is the Residential Tenancy Act, which is a provincial issue, I believe. But certainly councillors and mayor have the opportunity to speak to our provincial counterparts and ask for that to be balanced. Because right now, I think you'll find there's a ton of secondary dwelling units that are not being rented out by choice because people don't want to deal with tenants because of the Residential Tenancy Act. Again, not part of the conversation tonight, but definitely something that mayor and council can take under consideration. And so really, I'm going to be fairly brief tonight, believe it or not. I do think we do need some sort of regulations. I do think short-term rentals are limiting the number of long-term rentals. But there's a whole bunch of things that need to happen to make this happen, to make everybody happy, right? And the RTA is a huge part of it. And people need to have the flexibility for their secondary suite. So I am all in favor of making some changes to this, but not until we've got all of our ducks in a row. And as such, as the bylaws are currently written, I am not in favor of limiting what people can rent the manner in which people can rent their basement suites out, because the RTA is horrible. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker I have is virtual speaker, just says B. If you could start, we make sure B, Catherine and Lyle are moved over to the panel. And I see someone listed as B. If you could start with your name.
Yeah, hi, I'm Brian Gallagher, and I live in Maplewood in the district. Can you hear me?
I can clearly. Welcome. You have 5 minutes to address the hearing.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for having this hearing. That's a good opportunity to hear what people are thinking. Yeah, I grew up in the district, top of Lonsdale. So grew up in the district, stayed in the district, and yeah, I guess I'm in support of the bylaws as they're written. I think everyone acknowledges there's a housing crisis, and we need to do what we can, and different levels of government need to do their part. And there's lots of things on the table, and obviously this is one of them, limiting short-term rentals. And I think when short-term rentals first started, obviously years ago, it was supposed to be, a room that you had or you're away from vacation. So I think things have obviously shifted pretty far away from that in the last few years. So yeah, I think that spirit is good with short-term rentals, but it has changed. And I think we do need to do what we can as a community to provide long-term housing. So I'm in favor of the bylaws, parking restrictions, permitting, getting a permit, limiting to 6. I think all of those things make sense, as well as having it in different housing forms. So yeah, I'm in support of those, including the principal residence. And I think, the district is not alone in doing this. Vancouver, our neighbors have done it. And I think it has led to more long-term rentals going back onto the market. I know Vancouver has had some issues with enforcement, especially recently. So I think the enforcement of the bylaws seems to be one of the biggest challenges. But yeah, I just wanted to share my support. And I do hear people that have short-term rentals that they have made financial decisions based on there not being a regulatory framework. And so I think that is very concerning. And I think I'm in support of having a regulatory framework sooner rather than later, so more people don't make decisions that could change in the future. And I think that is unfortunate. So I would be in support of these bylaws being implemented and being implemented soon, so that people know what to expect, and people won't be making housing decisions based on something that's going to change pretty drastically. So thank you very much, and have a good night.
Great. Thank you very much for your comments, Brian. Next speaker is virtual speaker named Catherine.
Hello, Mayor and Council. Thank you. It's Catherine Fagerland. You've heard from me before. Just a couple of comments. I'm in favor of the bylaws. First of all, I think if we don't have bylaws, we can't enforce rules. And this has happened so many. I remember when secondary suites first came into being. One of the reasons for regulating or for allowing secondary suites was to be able to have regulations so that they can be made safe for people that live there. So I am in support of the bylaws. I really like the part that says that there needs to be a resident on site, and I would agree with for at least for the time being with that including a secondary suite in the same home. There has to be a resident in either place. Like, it's not, you don't build a home and then build a secondary suite that you use as an Airbnb. Several speakers have brought up all the problems they have in their neighborhood with the use of Airbnb, as they call it. I happen to know of another little neighborhood that it's like a resort, and I live in Deep Cove, so similar thing. It's like a resort municipality, almost mini municipality that has a lot of strangers, and strangers do not make a neighborhood. I do want to say that I'm kind of curious that all of the talk seems to be about Airbnb as opposed to bed and breakfast. I've stayed in lots of bed and breakfast, met lots of really interesting people during Expo 86. My parents ran a B&B, met long-term friends that way. I realized that having somebody actually living in your living unit can be disruptive, but it can also be really rewarding. And these bylaws would allow B&Bs, no problem. So that's part of why I'm so much in support of them. So that's basically it. I do recognize the problems of terminating undesirable tenants. I was part of the Rental Social Affordable Housing Task Force, and we had a member on the panel that was quite concerned about not being able to to basically dismiss tenants that were trashing his home. I get that that's a problem, but I don't think you solve that problem I think you solve that problem as opposed to creating more of solving it by short-term rental. And to the previous speaker, enforcement, find a way of enforcing these things. Bylaws are useless if they're not enforced, like the maintenance bylaws. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for your comments, Catherine Fagerlund. Okay, the next speaker I have is Lyle, and then I'm going to come back to the room for a couple of speakers. So Lyle joining us virtually.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm having technical difficulties here. There we go. Okay. My personal experience for short-term rentals has been threefold. One, in Victoria, BC, two in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and three in what was billed as a short-term rental, but turned out to be a party house on my street, roughly a block and a half from my home. Certainly anyone that was in that block would have heard that site at least 18 hours a day. I certainly did when I was walking the dog. I don't believe this particular one was licensed, but be that as it may. General comments on the bylaw. I'm generally favorable to the concept, but I do not agree that multiple secondary suites or short-term rental units should be allowed on the same property, and I do not believe tenants should be allowed to use their suites as short-term rentals. Again, I think one of the key points in the bylaw is that the owner must be in residence. I do not agree with absentee short-term rentals. I absolutely strongly do not believe that. I note in passing that not all homes in the district are suitable for short-term rentals. Specifically, I live on a street where my home is built on a curve. It's on a bus route going both ways. And realistically speaking, if you're looking at multiple cars in the same driveway or on the street, things can rapidly become problematic. No question about it. In any case, I do believe that it's not true that just because district doesn't have a bylaw that everything goes. Not true at all. It's certainly not the North Van district I know. But I do think that this is an option for people who own their own homes and have suites. Final comment. I do not accept the premise that short-term rentals belong on every house with a secondary suite in the district, nor in every location in the district. Some lots by their nature are completely unsuitable, as I just said. And again, enforcement is king. The party house that we had a block from my home could be heard within about a 2-block radius in all directions. And during the summer months, which were the peak months for this unit, every neighbor of mine in the area knew about, and frankly, I thought the homeowner, who I don't believe was resident in this time, would have been entirely entitled to have neighbors coming after him with pitchforks and torches. The behavior was really that egregious. And this is one thing that I do believe strongly that North Van District needs to lock down before we go ahead with any consideration of a bylaw on this basis. I don't think the bylaw as presented online to residents answers remotely all the questions that residents are entitled to ask. And I do think it needs more work before second and third reading is considered. So that's all I've got to say for the first round. Thank you for hearing us. And that's it for now.
Thank you for your comments, Lyle Craver. Can I take a couple people from the room? I've got one here and one there with the orange hat. Go ahead, come on up. Welcome. If you could start with your name, that would be great, but you have 5 minutes to address the hearing. Thank you.
My name is Amin Amarshi, and I'm in agreement with the proposed bylaws, except I think there's one issue that might create a problem. You're limiting Airbnbs to 6 guests. I had an experience. I had to rent an Airbnb when my house was being renovated. And I went into the house. It had a hallway, and then it had 8 separate units. So we felt pretty uncomfortable about it. There was no security there. The owner was not living there. So I immediately called Airbnb and got my refund for the whole week. Now, in the same situation, if you go ahead with the bylaws, 6 separate units can be rented in the same place. So I don't think the limitation should be the number of guests. The limitation should be the number of units that are in that primary residence. So if the owner decided to move into that house and still had 5 units, he would still be legal. So that's where I think the problem might be. We don't need to have the limitation on the number of guests, but the limitation on the number of units in that principal residence.
I think by our definition, there already is a limit on the number of units, which is that the primary principal residence of the owner and secondary suite. I think we need to clarify that, Mr. Gilmore.
Yes, thank you, through the mayor. Yes, the limit on the number of short-term rental units is based on the number of dwelling units. So in the case of a single-family home with a suite, the limit on the number of short-term rental units would be 2.
Okay. Okay.
each of the dwelling units.
So the district already does not allow, would not allow separate individual rooms to be rented out into 6 separate. It's already got a cap on 2 dwelling units.
Okay, good.
In the
I
house.
didn't see that on the slide. So the couple of people who were against Airbnbs, I think, were against it because there were multiple units, Airbnb units in their neighborhood, in the houses in their neighborhood. So I think this would address that issue. One of the gentlemen mentioned about the loss of taxes, the hotel taxes, but I just pulled up an Airbnb reservation, virtual reservation, and they do charge taxes. So the city is not losing any taxes on that. Those are the only 2 issues I wanted to raise.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, peach, orange hat. I'm not saying. Make a judgment call. Sure. I'll grab one more. Hi. Virtual.
Thank you, Mayor and councilors. Me and my partner run an Airbnb in Lynn Valley. We're a young family. We both come from various stages of poverty when our parents first came to this country. We worked very hard to get where we were and to be able to provide enough of a down payment to be able to keep a home in North Vancouver. I am totally against multiple Airbnbs, multiple short-term rentals, and there is a problem in the market. There's multiple people right now renting multiple suites and renting them out for huge amounts of money. But as multiple people have said tonight, we need these to be able to afford to keep our homes. Interest rates are high and they're only going to get higher. And to have young families in the community that build community. I coach my daughter's soccer team. I provide as much help in my neighborhood as I possibly can. I think I'm one of those people that neighborhoods need to have. And we've had multiple speakers tonight say the exact same thing. We already pay tax on the entire square footage of our homes. We should be able to decide what that is within reason and within guidelines that you've suggested, apart from the primary residence not being allowed to have a secondary residence rented. Sorry, I'm not a public speaker.
You're doing well.
Short-term rentals have allowed us to have eyes on our own property. When we bought the home, it came with a tenant. And with the tenancy regulations, we had to keep them until they left. These tenants allowed the doors to be open in our Lynn Valley home with mice running in the home and eventually taking over our whole home. We had to rip 2 floors of drywall down to be able to fix this problem. And it cost us a lot of money to be able to fix. And we couldn't get them out. Short-term rentals allowed both of us with ailing parents to have our parents live with us on a short-term basis so they can come visit their grandchildren. There's no other way without this. We do not have the square footage to provide my parents a place to stay. It may be a bit of a generalization on a couple of people that have spoken tonight, but it seems that they would be in an age category that they may not have a mortgage anymore. And I understand that there is problems with Airbnb, but when people have reasonably large mortgages with big interest rates, we need to be able to pay for them. We employ people from all over the North Shore, whether it's cleaners, guides, food people coming in for our Airbnb guests that no renter would ever pay for. 2 of our guests were coming here to buy in the district of North Vancouver. Those are tax dollars coming here to be able to experience what it's like to live in North Van for a day, 2 days, a week, that they get the opportunity to say, yes, this is the best place for me and my family. Not all Airbnb guests come with vehicles. In fact, most of our guests, we're on a transit line and most of our guests take transit or an Uber or taxi to get to our home. We don't take up very much parking and we live in a very densely populated car area with visitors coming for hikes all the time, parking in front of our homes, including parking in front of the driveway so we can't get in and out. And the district seems to take a little bit more time to remove these vehicles or ticket these vehicles or make it hard for us to live our lives the way we'd like on a weekend in the busy summer months. It doesn't seem that there's the language involved that would limit how many groups could have multiple Airbnbs, and I would like that addressed. I do agree that there has to be some sort of bylaw situation around it because there are obviously problems. So you heard many people tonight saying about smoking in front of their house, loud noises, and that there has to be infractions and bylaws being put on that stuff. But I just want to end on, we can't start killing our small families, our young families that are moving to this area to keep this alive. We need to be able to support them, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your time. I didn't grab your name on the way in. Quinn, thank you so much. Okay, I'll grab one more from the room, and then I do have some virtual speakers lined up as well. So I think I saw one at the back over here. Was it? Yes, please. No, I think this was the first hand up actually I saw earlier. Are you prepared to speak? Yeah, come on up. And we're not going to stop until everybody's had a chance to speak. So don't worry, we'll get around to everybody. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Michelle. I come with a very different perspective from probably everyone here at the moment. I came because I would like to think I'm a very nice landlord. I'm here to represent my tenant. After listening to the presentation, her concerns have been taken care of because she wanted to sublet, blah, blah, blah. But how I ended up here is we had a complaint about her when we had given her permission to sublet. So I'd like to kind of chuck it out there to, I think it was Thompson.
Probably best if you direct your comments to me, please.
Oh, that's all right.
Thank you.
I'm just really surprised to hear their experience and wonder if they put a complaint in, because I was on the other end and the bylaw officer from the District of North Vancouver was excellent. Like, I was very impressed. I think his name was Ryan Leach. He took it very seriously, wanted to get to the bottom of it. And, we were very concerned at the time that, our tenant had done something very bad and blah, blah, blah. And when it all kind of turned out, it was just a misunderstanding and everything was taken care of. So from my perspective, I actually think the bylaw enforcement is excellent. So I'm just chucking that out there. And would like to hear any feedback from some of the people if they had gone that route. I would also just put it out there as a normal District of North Vancouver resident. Be very careful what you wish for with the RTA right now. In our residence where I live, we've had some very, very, I want to use the right word, uncomfortable neighbors, long-term neighbors that the whole street didn't love. And we have, I can understand what they're going through. It's probably just worse if it's a long-term tenant because they don't leave. And I want to slightly just mention to everyone in this room, including council, I completely agree. We do have an affordable housing crisis on our hands. I think the two issues are quite separate in my world because I'm listening to what I'm hearing here, and the short-term market, the Airbnb market is necessarily not the long-term market because for some reason, whether it's flexibility or use of the space, they would never be available long-term. But on a housing affordability issue, Gemma from Seymour Ski Resort, it's very concerning to hear that she does not, or she cannot afford to live in the district. So I want to put it out there that maybe as a municipality, we really need to be looking at where we can be putting affordable housing and perhaps some parameters along that. I have friends that are in the WHA, which is the Whistler Housing Authority, and it's something that our district could very much look at, from that people who are contributing to the district would be subsidized. Like in her case, she works at Seymour and her salary would be taken into consideration for affordable housing. And I know that we're going to have a hearing or something about a new development plan at Keith and Mountain Highway that is for complex care housing that the district is going to give their land up for. Now, I will put that out there. It's an important sector of the market for sure, but those at-risk homeless people are not the people that the district identified in their housing their rental housing survey. The number one people they acknowledged needed housing was families. So if we're going to give that land up, let's put it towards affordable housing and get the people that are actually contributing to our community, like Gemma here, get her to be able to live on in the district. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much for your comments. Okay, I'm going to head back to the virtual side again here. So my next speaker is Gordon Baldwin, followed by May. Gordon Baldwin, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, but I'd love you to speak up or right into the microphone. It is a little bit faint.
Okay. Yes, thank you for give me the opportunity to talk. We are actually, at the outset, we were attacked by an early participant because we run an Airbnb. But I would like to make a few points on why we run.
Sorry, Gordon, just before you make your points, anything you can do to improve that microphone or sit closer to it or move it to you? I'm having a real difficult time clearly hearing you.
Okay, just a second here. Is this any better?
Yes, marginally, but thank you. Just clear voice straight into it, please.
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you for letting me speak here. At the outset, there's a bit of an issue here that we have a problem with one of our neighbors who attacked us earlier. We are an Airbnb, one of the two culprits on the street. So I think that we'd like to sort of express our approach to having an Airbnb in our house. We put a legal 2-bedroom suite in our home with the intention of the possibility of either having family use it or rent it out, possibly long-term, and definitely later on we considered short-term. Our rationale for going short-term was there was a number of things that worked for it with Airbnb. We had control over who stayed in our suite. We were concerned about the rumors that go around, or their factual situations where people have a bad tenant and they can't get rid of them, and it's a party house, and all sorts of disasters come from it. Now, whether that's exaggerated or not, we don't really know, but we really didn't want to embark upon that possibility. With a short-term rental with Airbnb, I think it's important that people understand what the rules are available to owners for the rental of their property. We first off have a choice of who we can have into our suite. There's a process where they apply, we go into their history, and we make sure that we get someone that is compatible with our neighborhood, with our own style of living. And so we have, for the most part, have been able to generally avoid, with the exception of one situation, people who were very good guests and behaved properly. The other thing is Airbnb has a process, and I'm not trying to market Airbnb, but there is a process whereby if there's a bad tenant or a bad situation, they are responsible for getting rid of the host or the guest. It's not, we don't have to sort of call the police necessarily or things of that nature. So that was very attractive to us. The other thing is the issue of parking, always a big issue in North Bend. My wife and I have lived here for over 60 years and in our current residence for close to 40 years. So parking is always an issue, but what needs to be realized is that when you have a long-term rental with a 2-bedroom, chances are, in order to afford it, they probably have 2 cars. We do have the legal off-road additional parking spot, and that would leave another one. We had another family member is renting a long-term rental in their house, and there's about 3 cars, all of which is, it's a problem no matter where you are on the North Shore. And so I'm not sure that short-term, long-term would resolve that issue. Going back to the definition in your bylaw of a principal residence, we have a little bit of a problem with that because it kind of totally takes out the secondary suite that we've built in out of the program. And so we think that you should consider, and our first read of the bylaws was that we would definitely fit the definition of a principal residence, and we still may because of our configuration. But I think the issue of having people that have too many suites in a home is a real issue, and we don't like it either. We have people that they just buy a house and put it out in the market on short-term rental, and we don't feel that's within the spirit of what we approach Airbnb to be. And I think it's a good process where there's one unit in the house in addition to the principal residence, and a limit on the people. We have a limit on the people that come to our house. The other issues are, things such as cell phone issue. Well, we do live in a dark spot on the North Shore, but we've spent significant money improving the reception in our suite for people so they don't have to go out on the street or in the backyards or in their cars. And as well as an Airbnb operator, you have house rules. And in those house rules, you can have very strict policies such as no smoking. I don't think we can do that. I'm not familiar with the Residential Tenancy Act in that regard, but my expectation is if you get a tenant in and they say they're non-smoking, they turned out to be a smoker, that's a problem. I'm out of time. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you very much for your comments, Gordon Baldwin. Okay, next speaker I have is virtual speaker May. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Welcome. We're again going to adjust the microphone and just see if we can, if you can speak directly into your microphone, that'd be fantastic. Can you hear me now? Very clearly. Thank you so much.
Here's the microphone. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to share a story about how I landed in the District of North Vancouver back in 2021. In a very hot housing market, I decided that we're going to move out of a small townhouse and maybe sell the townhouse and buy a house. And so after selling the house, we realized that we weren't able to find a house to buy. And so and the date coming to our moving out of the old house came near, and we still haven't found a house. So I actually found a house on Craigslist that's being rented out short term. And that gave me that last minute, oh my God, I have somewhere to go. My family, my husband, 2 boys, 2 cats, and all our belongings. So I was a beneficiary of someone who had a short-term rental available for me to rent in the District of North Vancouver. And at first it was a short-term arrangement, but then as time went on, I still couldn't find a place to live or buy or rent. They extended the time that I could stay there. So finally, I loved the district so much. And of course, there was one house that I could find to buy. So I ended up settling in the District of North Vancouver. Then I decided maybe I should do some rentals and build a suite. And then because, both my mother and mother-in-law broke their wrists 1 year apart. And at the time they need help. And I was like, wow, if they break something more serious in the future, where am I going to put them? Right. So I decided maybe I would build a suite. But in the process of building a suite, there's all these, as the first speaker have said, it's now $550 per square foot to build a suite. And what happened was we had to move out of the house to do some demolition and asbestos removal. And then I, again, had to find a short-term rental in the district that will house my family and my cats and our staff. And I simply could not just go live in a hotel room. We know how expensive it is to eat out. And I needed a kitchen. I needed a place for everybody to sort of live. So when you make these bylaws, I understand that you want to make create long-term rental stock. But then we had to think about what other problems we're creating. Now, after a while, I might have to do some renovations in the house, and I rented out the suite. And then I'm like, oh no, I can't live in my suite while I do my next renovation, because I might have to do some mold mitigation and we might have to move somewhere else. And then I need to find another short-term rental to live in. So I know that the council is not considering allowing Airbnbs or short-term rentals in secondary suites in this reading, but certainly I want you guys to just keep in mind that there are residents in the District of North Vancouver that need these places to go to when they do renos. If people are creating more secondary suites, they need somewhere to go while the renovation is taking place. If they had a flood, a fire, or something in their house, they also need somewhere to go. So if you didn't allow this kind of housing type in the district, it could cause more problems in the future. And I also want to comment on the speaker from Mount Seymour, and also regarding the people coming from overseas and needing a place to live. Now, I think when people come from overseas to work on the mountains, they're here for a short period of time. Let's say from November to April or something like that. And the rest of the time, maybe the owner can consider doing short-term rentals until such time that they come back. Another group is the students. They're students from out of town. They're usually here from September to May. So what I'm thinking is that some kind of short-term rental can be allowed in secondary suites for a short period of time when the students and the workers are not here, and convert into medium-term rental stock for them to stay in while they're working here and studying here during the year. And so that's all I want to share with you is my story about how I got here and how short-term rentals helped me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, May. Okay, I'm gonna look around the room again here. So I have another speaker back here. Yes, come on up. And what I intend to do, council, is I know there's been a number of questions that have been put through to staff. So at about 9 o'clock, I'd like to take a bit of a bio break and stretch. And when we come back, we'll hear the council clarifying questions read back into the record and with responses as best we can. And then we'll carry on with the public input speakers at that time. Welcome. If you could start with your name, that'd be great. But you have 5 minutes to address the hearing.
Thank you. I'm Sohail, Soheil. I just arrived in this district and it isn't easy to find a reasonable rental place, short or long term. But the only constant in life is change. Meanwhile, if we are planning any development, it should be directed to the long-term goal. Possible new build suites can be considered as infrastructure for future, such as next generation of transportation, as urban air mobility. Change the tree to opportunities and risk mitigation is my meaning. I also agree with one of the previous speaker that transportation is a main consideration for this development. What I mentioned is a true story, but not happened yet in North Vancouver. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Would anybody else like to speak a first time? It'd be a second time. I'll get to second time speakers in a minute. Would anybody else like to speak a first time? Yes, come on up. We'll take the break after this then.
Hello, thank you for listening to me.
Welcome. If you could start with your name, that'd be great. And then you have 5 minutes to address the hearing.
Sure, my name is Ian Carswell. I won't take very long. I've got a couple of points to make. I would say that I moved to Vancouver in 2018. I moved to North Vancouver, District of North Vancouver, approximately 2 years ago. And I became a citizen of Canada 4 days ago.
Congratulations.
So, yeah, and I'm very proud to be Canadian as well as Scottish, but my point is, I mean, I've heard a lot of very persuasive personal stories this evening, and all of them are extremely valid. Everybody everybody here is clearly very passionate about the need or not the need for short-term rentals. I would say that it was incredibly difficult for me as a middle-aged immigrant to Canada to move to the district of North Vancouver 2 years ago. And I have a mortgage that I'm very uncomfortable with, but I'm finding a way to make it work. And I'm not currently in favor of short-term rentals. What I haven't heard tonight is, stepping away from the personal stories, is the macro discussion of what short-term rentals do to the rental market in general. They are incredibly inflationary. I have a short-term rental which has multiple units operating out of it, and they're renting each room out for upwards of $200 per night. This is not, in my eyes, supporting local housing in any way whatsoever. It's extremely inflationary to both the short-term rental market, but also the long-term rental market. The story that we heard from May, she was dropping in and out of short-term rentals for very good reasons, but that must have been incredibly expensive for her. My concern is that there is a huge housing shortage within the district of North Vancouver, across the entire Metro Vancouver. I've lived in many places around the world, and Vancouver is easily the hardest place that I've ever tried to live. It's possible, but it's extremely difficult. Anything that we can do to support the long-term rental market and strip aggressive inflation out of the market. The level of inflation that is running through the rental market in Vancouver right now is exceptional and extremely dangerous in my view. It is not sustainable. And short-term rentals are like pouring petrol onto the fire. It's, in my opinion, it's extremely dangerous, and we have to be very careful. And the bylaws in themselves will help control, for sure, and I'm generally supportive of more control. However, to echo a lot of other people's points that have been made this evening, it's incredibly important that you as a district give yourself the appropriate muscle, teeth, whatever you want, to control short-term rentals, which are troublesome. You have to ensure that you have the rulings, enough bylaw officers to make sure that you can enforce responsibly and that you can shut down troublesome short-term rentals. It's going to be incredibly difficult to not have any short-term rentals. I think evidence right now, our experience to date, shows that it's not easy to control. But I feel like moving towards more short-term rentals is very different to the path that many other big cities in the world are taking right now. And I would just urge you as a district to just consider at a macro level the inflationary pressure that short-term rentals put onto not only the long-term rental market, but the short-term rental market. I'm hearing stories of long-term rental, two-bedroom long-term rentals going for upwards of $3,000 a month. That is outrageous, in my opinion, outrageous. People deserve to live in housing that is reasonably priced and does not absorb the majority of their wage that they're earning every week or every month. That's it for me.
Thank you very much. I guess I have time for one more before we're going to take a break. If there's a first-time speaker. No first-time speaker? Okay, well, we'll cut it there, and we'll have the opportunity when we return for clarifying questions from staff to be responded to and read into the record, and then we'll resume with first or second time speakers as soon as we're complete on those comments. But recommend about 3 or 4 minutes bio break, have a stretch, and we'll resume promptly at looks like about 9 o'clock. All right, we're going to resume the hearing here. And Councillor Back, if I can just have you cue your video or say something, that'd be great. Thanks. There you are. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to return from the recess here for the public hearing. Again, we have all members of council present either virtually or here in person, and so we're going to resume. As we were going through the first portion, there were a number of clarifying questions asked by council, and they've been sent over to staff for responses. Staff, if you can just do your best to read the question into the record and give a response. We know it's just arrived tonight, but we'll do our best. Zatha, you're going to be leading off with questions.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Good evening, members of council and community members who have come tonight. We have 6 bundles of questions, and I'd like to read each one out one at a time and then ask a staff member to answer, if that works for Your Worship.
Yes.
Question number 1, how will the District of North Vancouver regulate or enforce the short-term rental policy? And I'll turn that to Dan Milburn, General Manager.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. In terms of enforcement, we operate on a complaint basis at the current moment with limited resources. As proposed in the bylaw amendments before you tonight, the district intends to follow a more, what I would describe as a proactive enforcement approach. And that approach would include licensing through the business licensing bylaw and the collection of business license fees that would help pay for resources such as additional staff and resources to support enforcement activities, including court proceedings if required. In terms of the enforcement methods that are available to the district, the first is education and awareness. And as recommended by staff, a significant period of education is necessary to ensure voluntary compliance. That's always the preferred method of enforcement. Next is if we receive complaints or if we, as proposed, through proactive enforcement methods, investigate a situation of non-compliance and find that there is non-compliance with the bylaw. First, we seek voluntary compliance in these circumstances, such as identifying to the alleged individual who is non-compliant exactly how we see there is non-compliance. And if they fail to respond to that concern and bring the property into compliance, then we have a choice. And some of those choices include choosing an enforcement method that can involve ticketing for offenses, direct enforcement, such as business license suspension or cancellation, or setting new terms and conditions on a business license. And finally, a Supreme Court injunction, where we seek the direction of the courts to essentially prevent or cause something to occur to ensure the bylaw is complied with. Staff are recommending in this case that both new fines and staff resources be created to enable enforcement. Thank you, Your Worship.
Mr. Milburn, Ms. Atfa.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. The next question, can we provide assurances that regulation and enforcement will address people's concerns about short-term rentals? And again, to Mr. Milburn, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to reiterate, we're recommending moving to an active enforcement approach. The district enforces many bylaws, and this is a bylaw that we think is important to have a more active approach. The needs in the community for long-term rental are significant, and having an active approach will ensure that those priorities of council are maintained. So there is clearly an emphasis identified by staff and certainly would be in the enforcement practices of staff, including additional resources for enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Thank you. The third question, will non-conforming existing suites be made to come up to code? That's BC Building Code. How can we assure this so that safety is secure and all units would be on the same playing field? Mr. Milburn, please.
Thank you, Worship. Just a little bit of context. The district has permitted through zoning secondary suites for decades. And the province has recently changed the provincial rules requiring secondary suites be allowed in single-family homes in most circumstances. There is also a provincial incentive program. So we can direct individuals who are looking to legalize, a suite which is not fully compliant. We can direct them to those kinds of resources to ensure compliance. However, when we receive business license applications in homes, we typically don't require that the owner verify compliance with the current BC Building Code. That would often require substantial renovations to the structure. There are certain exceptions to that. One of those would be a childcare facility. If that's being put inside a single family home as a home occupation, there are often very particular exiting and fire safety rules related to a childcare facility for good reason. There are also in particular rules for bed and breakfasts, and staff are recommending that similar rules in terms of signage and fire safety plans and so on be in place for the short-term rentals as well in this proposal. So I would say that we aren't looking for the entire building to come up to code. However, we are looking at improved safety standards to address and ensure that there are minimum standards met across the community for the safety of those temporary occupants. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Can staff clarify the impact the proposed bylaw changes will have, if any, in bed and breakfast rentals? And I'll answer that one if I may. These bylaw amendments are primarily about short-term rentals. However, there are a couple changes in the bylaw related to bed and breakfast. The first one is really just clarifying the definition of bed and breakfast that already exists in our zoning bylaw to clarify that it offers breakfast and the host is on site. So a very minor amendment. The other change proposed in these bylaws is really, as was said in answer to the previous question, to have bed and breakfast and short-term rentals have the same requirements for safety plans, fire extinguishers, information to guests around municipal bylaws and the like. I will also add that there is a provision in the bylaw currently right now that which looks at other home occupations, which are generally businesses that people may run in their home, that if you have a bed and breakfast, you may have one other home occupation. These amendments are proposing to do that same layering for short-term rentals. So if there's a short-term rental in the home, one other home occupation.
Thank you.
The next question has a number of parts, so please bear with us as we go through them. The first one, and there will be different people supplying answers if that's all right. First question, are there any ramifications with regards to the provincial speculation and vacancy tax and applicable homes used for short-term rentals? Is a short-term rental principal residence regulation therefore the better practice? I'll stop there and ask Mr. Milburn to reply, please.
Thank you, Worship. The speculation and vacancy tax is a provincial taxation law and would have precedence over municipal bylaws in terms of its application. I don't see a direct impact. What we're talking about and what has been the main conversation tonight has been single-family homes with secondary suites. And those two dwelling units combined are one real estate entity. They cannot be sold independently. And the speculation and vacancy tax essentially follows independent real estate entities. So I'm not aware of any effect either way with respect to this proposed regulation. Any operator of a short-term rental would need to comply with whatever laws are applicable at the provincial level, as well as whatever laws are applicable at the local government level.
But because it's a principal residence, it wouldn't, the speculation and vacancy tax wouldn't apply to the properties.
Yeah, and the speculation and vacancy tax also has a long list of exemptions as well for various circumstances. And I think an important point, though, is fundamentally the speculation and vacancy tax is about ensuring that there are long-term rentals in the community. And so is the proposed regulation before council to require principal residency requirements in order to have a short-term rental. Thank you.
You want to add an additional clarifying? Sorry, Councillor Ma, what's the question?
The speculation and vacancy tax is on your principal residence, or?
The principal residences are exempt from the provincial speculation and vacancy tax, is my understanding.
That's correct. And there's a separate definition of principal residence within that act, as well as very specific exemptions for where there is other circumstances.
But that definition of principal residence is not the same as the definition of principal residence in this bylaw.
The intent is the same, but the definition is not identical. That's correct.
But everything that qualifies as a provincial principal residence would also like ours is broader than theirs. Yeah, okay. At any rate, it doesn't have a material difference over who can or can't rent in these spaces. And so Ms. Atva.
Thank you. Should staff add a requirement to the business license application to list all of the platforms an applicant intends to list their short-term rental unit on, or require the provision of a URL for said listings to ensure and monitor their license numbers listed? Ryan Gilmore.
Thank you, through your worship. We have yet to design the details of our active enforcement approach. However, in terms of including application forms and the like, however, the enforcement approach, as a part of that, we intend to secure a third-party service provider to help monitor listings, to do web scrapes and help identify listings and identify addresses. That is a key part of our enforcement approach. And because of that service, I don't see a need for applicants to list the various platforms they might want to be using or a URL, as those things may change over time of the license, and we would have our service provider helping with that. Thank you.
Next question, Your Worship. Will there be a proof of primary residence documentation required at the time of application?
Yes, thank you. Through your worship, yes, the intention is to require two pieces to prove principal residency. And the first, for example, would be a photo ID, such as a BC driver's license or BC ID. And the second would likely be a piece of government mail confirming address. From best practice, we've learned avoiding using things like utility bills as a primary piece of address confirmation, because they can be more easily changed or whatnot. So that is the current approach we're contemplating at the moment.
Thank you.
Your Worship, this next part is a little bit longer. I'll do my best to summarize that. Outsourcing is big business in all facets of our modern lives, and no more so than in an affluent municipality. Vancouver has experienced some short-term rental operators circumventing licensing rules by employing property managers for their rentals. Where do property managers fall into play with regards to short or long-term property management in the district? Are property managers in general required to hold a business license in the district? Where are they listed in the definitions of business license bylaw, and what is their cost to operate? Final part here, will applicants be required to declare the name, contact information, and business license of any property management company that might be engaged in managing short-term rental accommodation of their primary residence? Are there any amendments or adjustments currently needed to the proposed regulations and amendments on the table? And I think this is
Thank you, Worship. In terms of the first part of the question, there is a property management business license requirement. It's under a schedule of the fees and charges bylaw. It ranges in cost based on the numbers of employees from about $198.60 for 1 or 2 persons engaged in the business, up to $877.30 or more if there are more than 12 persons engaged in the business. Again, as Mr. Gilmore noted, we haven't prepared, of course, the application forms and the standard requirements. If there is an agent submitting an application on behalf of an owner of a business, we record that information, and that is taken down as a matter of routine, as well as, of course, the owner of the business details. So yes, would be the answer. If there is an agent acting on behalf of the owner, we'd be recording that information. And pardon me, Ms. Atfa, if I've missed any other part to that question.
Thank you. I think you've got the main pieces. Are there any amendments or adjustments that we believe are currently needed? Amendments and regulations.
And Your Worship, nothing recommended this time.
Thank you. Continuing on this bucket of questions, there are 3 more to this part and then another 3 questions afterwards. Please ensure that item 409 of the business license bylaw, which is the failure to give true information and infraction, is emphasized on the short-term rental license application.
Your Worship, that's more of a comment or suggestion, I would say, than a question. I think it makes sense. Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Here's a question. Will an online electronic licensing application process be available to the public to ensure simple, low barrier access, which in turn should promote compliance?
Thank you, Your Worship. As part of our digital strategy, we're moving to full electronic form submissions. Currently, application forms can be downloaded, filled out, and then submitted by email. We are looking to move the entire business license process, though, to a more automated application system in the future. And I think this is certainly recommended as part of any implementation of short-term rental applications as well. We have updated significant numbers of applications just this year, mainly focusing first on the building permit application process, but we will be working on business licensing in the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Question number 7, the final one in this cluster. What are the common web scraper tools used in municipalities, and have staff investigated what the anticipated cost is for the district to employ such tools? And Ryan Gilmore can answer this, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, staff are investigating the various web scraping tools that are available, and should a regulatory framework be approved, staff will undertake a competitive bid process to select a provider. That would happen sometime in the new year, should the regulations be supported this year. As I noted before, these tools are a critical piece to our enforcement approach to identifying addresses and listings across all platforms. In terms of costs, early to say, but estimates would be between $20,000 and $50,000 per year, and they tend to be based on the number of listings, so it could fluctuate from year to year.
Thank you. Sadva?
Thank you. This next question is looking at comparisons. Are the proposed bylaws similar to the City of North Vancouver and the District of West Vancouver? Ryan.
Thank you, through Your Worship. At present, neither the City of North Vancouver nor the District of West Vancouver have regulatory frameworks for short-term rentals. They're essentially in the same position that the district is now, where they are prohibited and enforced likely through a complaint-based process, much the way we do now. The District of West Vancouver explicitly says they're just not permitted. The City of North Vancouver states they're not permitted in entire dwelling units that are unotherwise occupied. It's essentially a border and lodger scenario is kind of what they're supporting, but nothing like short-term rentals as we're contemplating today.
Thank you.
Thank you. This next question is either for Mr. Milburn or Mr. Gilmore. Will the provincial legislation amend the bylaw if approved, or will we keep the hearing open until the legislation is announced to avoid bylaw amendment?
Thank you, Worship. I'm not aware that the province is contemplating legislation that would require amendment to district bylaws. We understand it would be voluntary for local governments to use enhanced enforcement methods that would then be offered by the province. Again, we do not have all the details, though. That is anticipated later this fall, although no specific timeline has been identified. So that goes to the next question. Is there a suggestion to keep the hearing open until the legislation is announced? It would be, given that the unknowns related to that project, staff would recommend that we proceed with the bylaws, consider them under their current merits, and that if the provincial legislation comes into effect and bylaw amendments would be recommended to further enhance our enforcement capability and capacity, we would bring those amendments back to council at that time and adjust the bylaw. And the reason why I say this is an appropriate approach is we anticipate that we will learn as we apply this bylaw, if it's approved by council, and that there may be other housekeeping amendments that could come up during the year as we go through the education process, if, again, the matter is approved by council. So certainly we've learned that an incremental approach of bylaw improvement over time as legislation at the provincial level changes is a viable approach and one that we would recommend in this case as well.
The final two questions, Your Worship, are related to enforcement, and I'll ask Mr. Milburn, please, to answer both of them. What is the difference between an active approach to enforce bylaws and what we do now? And finally, is that if a bylaw is contravened and we are aware, do we actively investigate or do we wait for a complaint?
Thank you, Worship. The current enforcement approach is a complaints basis approach. There are many bylaws in the district that are enforced in this way. For example, we don't conduct site-by-site investigations of every home in the district. We don't actively go out, knock on the door and see if there's compliance. There is, however, many active enforcement approaches used by the district, and we're recommending we move to a more active approach. So what we mean by that is using tools such as the data scraping, as referred to by Mr. Gilmore previously, to identify all of the possible known short-term rentals, and then to actively approach those owners, approach those businesses, and seek compliance and ask them to comply. And the point of the education period, if the bylaw is applied, is to help us do that work and to ensure we have the time to hire the staff, get them trained up, and actively do that work. So once we have the data scraping and the data, we can then act in a proactive manner to seek out those individual businesses and request compliance. The next question is, if we are aware of a bylaw contravention, do we act or simply wait for a complaint? In the case of a more passive enforcement approach that we have now, we often have trigger points where we try to capture and identify and address contravention. So an example is if a business license is being applied for another home occupation at the same location, or if there's a building permit application at the same location, and it's discovered through that process that there is an unlawful use, such as a short-term rental, which is the current situation, they're not lawful, then we would essentially use those tools of permitting and licensing to ensure that compliance was achieved prior to issuing that approval. Okay, so but it's more passive in the sense that we wouldn't be data scraping, we wouldn't be actively going out and addressing those issues. So that's the current approach. And so in other circumstances, though, if we aren't made aware of it through those licensing and permitting techniques, we would typically rely on a complaints basis. So such as you've heard tonight, we do receive, I believe it's approximately a dozen complaints per year, or a little bit more. Mr. Gilmore would know the exact number, I'm sure, because he's got all the data in his head.
Thank you. Through the mayor. So far this year, there's been 38 complaints.
Okay.
Last year, I want to say 26.
Right. So the numbers of complaints and or those individual properties, just to clarify, Your Worship, I just wanted to make sure that council understands the scope.
Yes, those are individual properties that may have had more than one complaint as part of that file.
Okay. So it's in that range of scale of complaints, and staff respond to each of those complaints and follow up. I would say it is a challenging area of enforcement, no doubt. And I think whatever tools the province can provide to local governments to assist us in obtaining compliance would be extremely beneficial to this area. Thank you.
The signaling we've had from the provincial government is that it's largely going to be information sharing on to assist compliance.
Which is highly valuable
there we go.
in this circumstance.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for those responses. And I'm going to return back to public input. And so would anybody else like to address the hearing for a first or second time? I believe Dr. Cost had indicated that you wanted to speak an additional time. Just double check and see if you're, can we just move Dr. Cost over to the panel?
I'm there.
There we go. Hi. Welcome. You have 5 additional minutes to address the hearing.
Okay, let's see now. I think I finished first 4 pages, 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Okay, so I think I mentioned the Kelowna, Powell River, and Victoria and Vancouver generally limit short-term rentals to primary residences only. That means only the homeowner who lives in the unit or the tenant who lives in the unit may list the unit as a short-term rental. So investors who do not live in the residence may not list or their unit or units as short-term rentals. Vancouver has also negotiated with Airbnb to only post Vancouver Airbnb listings with a Vancouver business license number. Is the District of North Vancouver going to arrange with Airbnb a similar arrangement that Vancouver has made? That would be the question. Now, when I first took possession of this house about 1974, there was a basement suite, as it were, in which my late father-in-law lived for a number of years. And then the secondary suite regulations came into play. And if we were still alive at that time, we would have had to go illegal because those changes were just not affordable to us. We couldn't upgrade the home to the new standards. So what I say here, Council, is be careful that you do no harm, to the existing situations where family members are actually living with you in the home. I don't believe that this bylaw applies to family members visiting us for a short term. Yet there's no reassurance that the exemption exists for family members. So I'm worried about that. Changes will add fairness by treating short-term rentals similar to a business while protecting the supply of long-term rental housing, it says in the report. I'm sorry, but there's no verbiage anywhere that say there is a protection of long-term housing rentals that is coupled with this short-term rentals. You talk about protecting long-term rental housing, and you said this will do that, but I don't see any mechanism to protect the long-term rental housing. Now, Richmond has short-term rentals, sorry. And I sent you the link to that report. The operators must notify the neighbors of the proposed short-term rental operation and provide contact information to the neighbors. I think that's an excellent suggestion. And I think we should put that in place as well. It's just a procedural thing. The rule in Richmond, though, instead of 6, they only allow 2. I found that quite interesting. Also, not only the owner, but an immediate family member is all that's required to reside in the home. Clearly, that comes in handy when holiday season comes and the owner wants to go on holidays. Then they have a family member substitute, a close family member, whatever that is. You could define that. That would alleviate that stress. Under the proposed framework, a business license would only be approved for a residence principal resident. An individual can only have one principal residence. I wonder how that's enforced and determined. Because there are people that have multiple, and certainly I'm concerned how do property manage do away with the need to have a property owner on site. Anyway, I think I'll stop at this point and have my final slides hopefully in the third 5-minute segment. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Corey Cost. The next second time speaker I saw was Gordon Baldwin joining us virtually. Again, I'm going to press you to speak directly into your microphone.
I'm trying. I apologize for speaking laborly here, but I wasn't prepared to speak tonight, but felt I had to. I just want to reemphasize one of the points I didn't probably make earlier was that there are significant economic benefits of a short-term rental scenario. Off the top, there's a 3% fee, which is collected by Airbnb and submitted to the district and for their use. And I think that was addressed in some of the papers issued prior to the announcement of this meeting. The other thing is that approximately 80% of our guests are from out of the district or the lower mainland. And when they come here, we have a full suite. It's a legal suite and it has a full kitchen and everything necessary. But the bulk of them go out and engage in meals and activities within the district. And we have an extensive guide where we direct our guests to different areas where a lot of the revenue there, and they do spend quite a bit of revenue, surprisingly, but and they're bringing quite a bit of money into the district or the vendors or suppliers in the district. We also employ individuals to provide housekeeping services, changing of bed linens and things of that nature. And again, those are local people that are supplied, and a long-term tenant would not do that. We also employ a significant number of trades to maintain our property, to make sure that it's to the level of, or the standard of offering that we choose to have. And that's can add up to quite a bit of maintenance that we would not, a long-term tenant, or we would not otherwise engage in, just because we want to make a good presentation. And then just to sort of emphasize what some other people have mentioned is that a lot of our, about 20%, it's really hard to say, we don't keep these accurate statistics, but just judgment that a lot of people we've had come in because they were doing renovations in the neighborhood. They wanted to stay in their neighborhood, and we were able to accommodate them on a short-term basis. And there are a number of people that come into our suite because they have family in the district, and it's easier for them to stay with someone such as ourselves versus try and find a hotel or a motel unit, which are getting scarcer and more expensive. I think that I want to dispel the rumor or that it's a hugely profitable business. It's not. There is income there. There's no question about it, and that's why we're in it. But we also enjoy meeting the people from around the world and putting our district. We're very proud of North Vancouver district, born and raised. Well, not born here, but certainly raised here. And we feel that we have a lot of, our district is a beautiful spot. And for the most part, we've had a tremendous reception from our guests. They love it here. And so I think we would lose that goodwill that's generated around the world if we were all into long-term residential scenarios. So anyway, thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Gordon Baldwin. Okay, would anybody else like to address the hearing a first, second, or third time? I have a virtual speaker first time under the name Human. I'm gonna just.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome. You have 5 minutes to address the hearing.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I think there are quite a different ideas on both sides in favor and against this bylaw. I'm not in favor in bylaw. I think as it is, it's not going to solve any problem. But couple comments. I think public engagement is fantastic, but how we engage public is the most important part. First is the level of publicizing that everyone, not everyone, but at least quite a lot of people in the district of North Vancouver are aware and contribute and engage in that public engagement. Second, what questions we are asking and how we are asking is most probably is going to define the answers. And the third one is if there have been a public engagement in 2017 or 2020, it may not be the solution for 2023. As we know, the housing market and mortgages have been changed drastically in the past year or two. If I have any solution, not probably, but I think a public engagement of a few years ago may not address today's problem. The last one, which I think we saw lots of people talking about the bylaw and its enforcement. I want to emphasize that without having a bylaw that could be enforced, I don't think there is too much of value to that. And enforcement is not easy and very expensive. I think if bylaw does address the concern of the majority of the residents of the District of North Vancouver, it will be a successful bylaw. Otherwise, people will find a way around it, and in cases will do illegal things to make their livings and pay their mortgages. I don't think that the concern of bylaws or city should be addressing a problem which need to be addressed by federal government, by local government. I don't think that huge burden should be put on the individual owners of the residential properties, which are already carrying a huge burden of the mortgage. I don't think in a free market and society, we should tell the owners of the property who are paying tax, who are paying the mortgages, we shouldn't decide to them what they need to do with their property. Of course, it's great to have a framework and make sure that there is enough parkings, there's bylaws, people to obey with those bylaws, but not to decide on their behalf that what sort of rental they have to have, short-term or long-term. We recently, in the past 2-3 years, we see that there was huge pressure on the homeowners, and almost anything on the government level was in favor of renters, like rent freeze and no eviction and so on. I don't think it helped renters. We see that eviction increased, but with a different reasoning, with different excuses. So where I'm going with this is a bylaw which doesn't help the majority of the residents who are under financial pressure. It is just a patch on the problem. It's just hiding the problem, and a few months or a few years later, we have to deal with different set of problems. So I think we have to address the source of problem, not just patch it. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. Okay, I'm gonna, before I go back for first, second, or third, I'll double check back in. I believe a couple more questions have come in from council. Do you have responses prepared? Okay, Ms. Atva, you want to direct those questions?
Thank you so much for the ability to do so. First question, are family members exempt? This was picking up on one of the speaker's questions.
I think you should speak right into the microphone. That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll repeat that. The question is, are family members exempt? And this was picking up on a question from one of the speakers. Mr. Milburn will answer this, please.
Thank you, Worship. Happy to answer that question. I think this really comes down to whether or not the use is a business. So a business is defined in the community charter as the carrying on of a commercial or industrial activity or undertaking of any kind and providing professional, personal, or other services for the purpose of gain or profit. And that would include a short-term rental can be a business. Providing living space to a family member would not typically fall into the definition of business in the community charter.
Okay, thank you. Ms.
Thank
Atha?
you. The final question that we are seeing at this time, will the bylaw be adopted in time to meet the municipal and regional district taxed, the MRDT, application deadline of November 30th? And Ryan Gilmore will answer this.
Thank you. And through the mayor, district staff have consulted closely with North Shore, Vancouver's North Shore Tourism Association regarding the reallocation of the MRTT revenue towards affordable housing. Their board voted unanimously to support that shift in revenue. And the agreement is in 2024, 50% of the online platform revenue would be returned to the district. And then in 2025, that would move to 100% of that revenue stream. In terms of the timing, I may defer to the clerk on the timing, but I believe there would be sufficient time for the readings, for various bylaw readings prior to November 30th. But I believe staff are intend to proceed. But Mr. Milburn can elaborate.
Thank you, Mayor Little. Just to add to that, we've been working closely with Vancouver North Shore Tourism Association. They're supportive of this transfer of funds to the district, and we will work with them to ensure that we meet the necessary timelines in order to transfer the funds in 2024 and 2025. We think this is an important initiative regardless. We think that revenue, if it is generated by online platforms, which it has been for a number of years, should be directed towards rental, supportive and social housing initiatives of the district. And the Vancouver North Shore Tourism Association board agrees that it would be definitely an asset to transfer those funds to the district for us to use them as part of council's strategy for housing, as it would certainly benefit their members, their employees for recruitment and attention as well, as council generally has quite an aggressive supportive and social housing program. And we're certainly interested in acquiring that resource to help bolster that program. And VSTNA, Vancouver North Shore Tourism Association, pardon me, is definitely supportive of that approach. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see we have a couple more questions coming in from council. Again, just clarifying questions, please. Have you seen, Ms. Atva, have you seen the next couple of questions?
Yes, I have. Thank you, Your Worship. If this bylaw is passed, how does the district track its effectiveness? For example, a reduction in short-term rental listings or an increase in licenses for secondary suites? I will ask Mr. Gilmore to respond to this, please.
Thank you, through your worship. Yes, it's a good question. Measuring success. I think the two listed here are good ones. A reduction in STR, short-term rental listings, would be a good metric. And if we saw a corresponding increase in secondary suite registrations, that would also be a positive sign. Reduction in complaints may be also another something to keep track of. Mr. Milburn, if you have anything to add. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. I will add one small point to that, the report, the public hearing report indicates that staff will report back in a year with the findings of how the process has been moving along. Next question. Are funds generated by short-term rentals going to increase enforcement and affordable housing? What kind of revenue are we talking about? And I'll turn that to Mr. Milburn.
Thank you, Mayor Little, and I'm going to speak slowly to give Mr. Gilmore time to pull up the anticipated revenue related to the online platform revenue from the Vancouver North Shore Tourism Association. So we're really talking about two potential sources of funds. One is a business licensing fee, and that would be used to generate essentially funds to cover the administration of the scheme. So this would be by law enforcement staff, this would be funding the data scraping tool, this would be pursuing enforcement actions. So that's the intent of that pool of funds, to administer the business license regulation. In terms of the revenue generated from the online platform revenue, which is currently collected by the province and then passed to the Vancouver North Shore Tourism Association, those monies, as agreed to by the parties and as we would obtain provincial approval for through application, is to be directed to housing initiatives. And the province supports that as a policy matter, would require an application and would require the district to submit information on our current housing plans, such as Council's Housing Needs Report, approved in July. But we certainly feel confident we can present that information. We think that is achievable. And I just see there are additional questions popping up, and I'll look back to Ms. Atfel. I'm not sure if I covered that.
Question didn't get answered though. What kind of money are we talking about?
Ah, yes.
Mr. Gilmore was going to work on
Oh.
that piece.
Oh, you're still working on that? Okay.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do have an answer for you now. So just to go back to 2022, the online accommodation platform revenue for that year totaled just over $300,000. So far in 2023, so not the entire year, I believe these figures are for the first 2 quarters of 2023. The revenue has already surpassed that. It's over $320,000 from online accommodation platform revenue.
So that's MRDT. And what's the business license projection revenue?
It would obviously, based on the number of business license applications we get, if it's 1,000 licenses listings that we have now at $350 each, that would be $350,000 per year. That said, I would anticipate, and this is I'm speculating, but I would anticipate fewer business license applications than there are listings now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Also related, Your Worship, to the municipal and regional district tax. Why is there a delay of 1 year for the district to receive 100% of the MRDT? Mr. Milburn will answer.
Thank you, Worship. The Vancouver North Shore Tourism Association has been using the money in accordance with their mandate, and to change quickly would definitely be a challenge to how they deliver their services. And so they agreed essentially to a phased approach, 50% then 100%. And certainly staff feel that's a reasonable approach, given that the Vancouver North Shore Tourism Association has been using that revenue currently to provide the effective delivery of marketing services for tourism on the North Shore. And they wish to transition some of the money to us as allowed by the province, but they need a bit of time to do that fairly and effectively, and staff support that approach.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, Your Worship. If this bylaw is effective, would not the revenue from the MRDT decrease and less will be transferred to support affordable housing programs? I'll answer this if I may. A reduction in the amount of that tax collected would result if there was a drop in listings, which we have seen in other places with regulations that may be a case. There may be fewer listings. However, in terms of the transfer to affordable housing programs, we also fund affordable housing through the Affordable Housing Reserve. So there are other sources to help support the development of more affordable housing in the district.
Okay, thank you.
There's a question that follows. Can questions that aren't related to something that was specifically asked by?
It's been answered.
Internal.
It's okay.
This is all moving so fast in front of me. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. All right, all right. So as we're drawing towards the close of the meeting, I'm noticing a tailing off of public input here. I believe Dr. Cost has requested to speak a third time. He hasn't been repeating himself, so I'm inclined to grant him a third time. Once Dr. Cost has spoken, then I'm going to have to go through a bit of a process where I exhaust the speaking list, and it's just a repetitive formality in order to make sure that we've heard everybody's feedback. But at this point, I'm going to go to Dr. Cost joining us virtually, and then I'll make sure I'll check with everybody before we close off and exhaust the speakers. Dr. Cost? welcome. You have 5 final minutes to address the hearing.
Thank you. We talked about the owner being on the property. So I would like to throw a question out. What if there are more than one owner jointly or quadruply owners? Is one sufficient to live there, or do all of them have to live there? I don't need an answer to that, but it's something you should yourself get clarifications. And I think how do property managers do away with the need to have property owners on site? I don't think that question is answered, but it should be. And I see a big difference anyway between short-term and long-term rentals. One's to do with locals usually wanting to work here, live here, and the other is tourists. And there's a big difference between the two categories. The license for the short-term are often multi-year, as I've found, and looking at the websites for getting the licenses. It seems the district is only licensing them a year at a time. So I want you to consider that aspect of multi-year to give some stability. Finally, I'll go on to the thing I sent. Are short-term rentals in single-family homes a community benefit or more a private benefit? I won't go into the reply that was given to me by ChatGPT, but I think they're reasonably sensible.
Thank you.
So this leads me to the miscellaneous issues and comments. Who can file the complaint? Is it only the immediate neighbor, which I might have mentioned, but it should be answered. All the surveys that were presented were really, in the report, were really self-reporting and lacks any evidence of significant community support, since surveys were not done random sampling. That's the only way to get a valid survey. Those with block watch, and I was one of those for a 25-year period, may have a hard time recognizing friends from foes with the spread of visitors walking in your neighborhood that you're used to. Of course, I don't know if anybody mentioned, but this whole practice is quite unfair competition for our hotel industry. It certainly exacerbates the shortage and high price of long-term rental units, in my opinion, and that's what all the studies say. Housing, when treated as a commodity, becomes a vehicle for wealth and investment rather than what we intended to be, a social good. Now, the ticketing fines listed on page 15 of the PM report, are they applicable daily? I'm not sure. It didn't say daily on the fines. The short-term rentals are currently not a permitted use under the zoning bylaw. So I asked, how many tickets have been issued until now? And now we go to the final page of questions. Can only one of the principal units, secondary suites, coach houses, be used for short-term rentals at a time? That is, can they be shared amongst 6 visitors? Can the maximum of 6 visitors be for more than just one booking? In other words, 2 bookings are combined. It is well known, it is well worth for council members to read the July 2023 academic publication from the Annals of Tourism Research, challenges and effects of short-term rental regulations. And I gave you the reference in the website to go to, and this more or less gets close to the end. The most relevant, I'm quoting here, the most relevant are the negative impacts on housing availability and affordability, gentrification, inhabitants' displacement, and a sense of alienation from the most touristified neighborhoods. That's been the result of studies. I didn't hear, little tiny things, I didn't hear anything about smoke alarms needed in individual rooms. We certainly have them in our home, and I would have thought they would be recommended as part of the safety aspects. Anyway, it's better to have some regulations on these issues than none. But the point is, what are those regulations and are they the best fit for our community? Thank you for allowing me to speak third time.
Thank you for your comments, Corey Cost. I also have a hand here in the audience and then another virtual hand with Lyle Craver. So I'll ask you to come on down to the desk here. Welcome, and when you're comfortable, you have 5 minutes to address the hearing. If you could start with your name, please.
I'm Barbara Marshall, and I just sort of parachuted in on this to come to just listen and learn. The number 6, how, I don't know, it's a question, I don't know how that number came up. To me, it seems like a lot. Sort of the typical dwelling that we're talking about that could go for short-term rentals with the owner in place and the short-term rental. I don't know what they would have to accommodate 6 people. And is that going to be under, are there beds for 6 people, like positions for 6 people? Or is this like one bed with a lot of sofas? And just that I'm just wondering, or is six adults? I totally get a family gets to 6 very quickly, but if it's short-term rentals, you're going to get 6 adults with 1 parking spot. Some cars, some, you know, whatever are going to happen. It's a combination, like we see it already. Those are already issues with long-term care rentals, parking spots, number of people's in them. I see the point of the short-term rentals where, you know, a family wants it for families, owners, where a family comes from out of town, country to visit and stay for lots of reasons. And then the rest of the year, it could go out to, and there are people, we too, when we moved here, we needed a short-term rental. Well, because we didn't have a house yet, we didn't find something in the 4 days that we were allowed. So I looked at short-term rentals and they were very expensive, and there was hardly any out there. So there's good reasons to have them. But I guess I think what's happening here is we need the regulations in place to keep them so they work well for the community and they're not detrimental. It's just like with the long-term care rentals. They're great. Everybody needs a place to live, but we all have heard of the renters that you can't get out or that are a problem. So that's what we want to avoid with the short-term rentals, I believe. So I think that's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next virtual speaker is Lyle Craver. Lyle Craver, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, your worship. Here we go. Got the video on. Okay, there seems to be some confusion over some of the things that have gone on tonight. If I understand things correctly, this proposed bylaw deals with 1 rental unit per 1 privately owned home. This does not involve multiple suites in a single unit, and this certainly does not include a combination of secondary suites and short-term rental units within the same home. If I have misunderstood on any point, I need to know sooner than later. In any case, it is not at all clear whether short-term rental units, multiple short-term rental units may be offered to various homes in the same block. So for instance, if there are 10 houses in a particular block, does that potentially mean 10 short-term rental suites in the neighborhood? Again, not clear on that. I do think the answers to these questions are extremely important because I think the evidence seems to be fairly clear that short-term rentals are a direct threat to the availability of long-term rental suites in residential neighborhoods. If we're talking about secondary suites, then they do fulfill a particular need, and this particular consideration works against it. Now, admittedly, this whole debate, it concerns giving homeowners additional options to do with their property, and with that, I'm fine. But we must keep this in hand. Bottom line is, the district in North Vancouver already has a shortage of suites, both long-term rental as secondary suites and apartment units generally. And as a result, a reasonable balance can be reached, but it should not be all short-term rental. It should not be all long-term rental, because we are actually trying to accommodate long-term residents, both renters and homeowners, and we ought not to be risking driving any of our own people away. Finally, in closing, let me note that a previous speaker has said that he figures that once a homeowner has paid their municipal taxes, once they've paid their mortgage, they should be free to do pretty much whatever they like without further governmental interference. I reject that proposition. The main people that short-term rentals impacts are not the homeowners, but their immediate neighbors. Again, and one final question, which I'm quite content to hear the answer to privately. Is it true in general that several people speaking at tonight's public hearing that their full names have not been given to the clerk and or their contact information and addresses? If so, this represents a change in what I understood to be public hearing procedures. But again, short-term rentals are important. They're a small part of the overall picture. And I do think our primary concern has to be the maintenance of rental properties in district. Thank you.
Mr. Craver, just while you're on the line there, I figured I'd respond to a couple of the points that you said. You said that your understanding would be that there would be a maximum of one rentable space, one short-term rentable space. And I think actually what's provided is there are certain circumstances under which there would be two rentable spaces, but the vast majority of houses would be one rentable space. But if they have a long-term tenant, then you could rent through agreement, potentially under some circumstances, two dwelling portions within the same house. And then the other question that you raised that I think I've got a response to is on geographical restrictions. There's nothing contemplated in this bylaw to suggest that just because one neighbor has a short-term rental that it would somehow restrict others within a geographic area from having them. There's nothing like that contemplated in the bylaw. Mr. Gilmore, do I have those pieces correct?
Yes, Your Mayor, correct on both accounts.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Your Worship, in light of that, I have to change my feeling about how I feel about the bylaw, because I think both those past two statements render the bylaw problematic as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you very much. Okay, would anybody else like to address the council a first, second, or third time? Do we have any additional questions that have come into the staff? Okay, so now I'm going to go through that sort of exhausting the public speaker portion. So I'm going to ask, would anybody else like to address this hearing, virtual or in person, first, second, or third time? Yeah, come on up. Second time speaker. Sorry, was it Michelle?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to discredit the importance that this has been discussed. I'm just quite shocked. There's been 37 complaints and our tenant was one of them. I don't know if there's a problem here. Like I would have thought there would have been way more. And I'm just concerned as a district taxpayer that, you know, that's a lot of time and money we're about to spend on something that might not actually be a problem. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So first time, would anybody else like to address the hearing virtual or in person? A second time, would anybody else like to address the hearing? And a third and final time, would anybody else like to address the hearing a first, second, or third time? Okay, Mr. Clerk, I see no further speakers on the matter. I believe we have exhausted the speakers list. Is that your understanding as well. Okay. So at this point, council, I'll entertain a motion. Councillor Murray.
I move that we close this hearing and return this bylaw to a regular scheduled meeting of council.
Thank you very much. Seconded by Councillor Hanson. Thank you very much. And I'll call the question on that. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. Mr. Clerk, can you say, do we have a recommended date for return to second and third reading at this point?
It's November 6th, Your Worship.
November 6th is, you'll have to watch the agendas up until that point, but our intent is to have that on the November 6th meeting of council for the second and third vote and deliberations by council. I will just say, you know, I think that the feedback that we heard, maybe you know, when the council was looking at this matter initially, it was hard to reach consensus on it because there's so many different switches you could turn on and off to make it work in the community. I think what we've seen today is that that same challenge exists in the community, and all I would like to do is give assurances that if regulation is passed by the council, that it is still a living bylaw that we can change in future. We could make adjustments to if we needed to, or if we don't reach a consensus at second and third reading, then I think we're probably likely to still come back with other alternatives after that point. So, but again, I think it reflects what we've already seen back in the community. At this point, we have closed the hearing. And so what that means is that the council can receive no further submissions from the public. If you have any additional questions, you do need to direct them to the clerk because the council needs to be able to make the decision based on the information that we received up until this point only. And so we can't actually receive additional direct communication back to the council on this matter. With that said, I want to thank staff for preparing the reports for council's consideration tonight. Thank you to the public for your comments and feedback, and thank you to the members of council. You're going to have some hard decisions to make over the next little bit over all of the public hearings we've had, but thank you for your participation this evening. Good night.
So we have 400 billion real.